G'day mates, it's B-Buster here, and I would like to give Green Chef a big shout out for sponsoring this episode. So Green Chef is a CCOF certified meal kit company. They make eating well easy with plans to fit every lifestyle, whether you're keto, paleo, vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free, or just looking to eat more balanced meals. Green Chef offers a range of recipes to suit your preferences. Green Chef is now actually owned by HelloFresh as well, and with a wider array of meal plans to choose from, there's something for everyone. I really like switching between the brands too, and now you guys can enjoy both brands at a discount with me. Green Chef offers 24 always changing recipes to choose from every week, so you never get bored. They save you time by cutting down on weekly meal planning, prepping, and grocery shopping. Green Chef is also the most sustainable meal kit and the only meal kit that is both carbon and plastic offset. They offset 100% of their carbon footprint as well as 100% of the plastics in every box. They also have an enormous menu, and I really love the way that they've organized their selections into different dietary and lifestyle choices. It's super easy to look through the selections and find something that I'm looking for, like their French onion pork chops that I ordered. The creamy sauce on the pork chops was just amazing, and the dish was just what I needed after a cold hike that I'd come back from with my buddies. So, go to greenchef.com/scared130 and use code SCARED130 to get $130 off plus free shipping. That's greenchef.com/scared130 and use code SCARED130 to get $130 off plus free shipping. Join the #1 meal kit for eating well today. Green Chef. This is a story that happened to me a few years ago when I was 26. I've been too scared to talk about it until now out of fear of being made fun of. But here is my story. My name is Sarah. So 4 years ago, my great-grandmother passed away at the age of 98. We were close all the way into my adult years, so the death hit me hard. She lived in a one-story house in a rural town 30 minutes outside of Springfield, Missouri. Her house sat on a large and heavily forested piece of land. There was a large hill several hundred feet behind the house that dropped off into a creek, and I spent almost my entire childhood staying on this piece of land and had learned how to take care of it and the house. After the funeral services, I volunteered to stay and take care of the land while my family decided on what to do with it. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to buy the land, so I wanted to spend as much time out there as I could. My first 3 days I spent packing up items and cleaning the house just generally. The nearest neighbor was like 5 miles away, so I didn't have to worry about unwanted guests that would get into the way of my packing and disturb my personal way of mourning the loss of someone so close to me. But the 4th day is when the odd events started occurring. I slept in a sleeping bag in the living room, and when I woke up, I immediately screamed because a few inches away from my face was a dead copperhead snake. It was normal for snakes and other small animals to get into the house, so seeing the snake wasn't surprising, but it was the fact that it was so close to my face and it could have bitten me at any moment while I was sleeping. I briefly wondered why the snake had just come into the house and died like that, because there were no physical signs that anything was wrong with it. So I just threw it outside and continued with my day, and the weird event was almost forgotten. Later that evening, though, I decided to go for a walk through the woods to enjoy the nice weather and reminisce about the good times that I had in the woods and all the games that I used to play there. I was walking along an old path that led to a well. The path was narrow and was close to the drop-off that led to the creek, when I heard a branch snap behind me and instinctively turned my head. I didn't see anything, so I assumed it must have just been an animal and continued walking. But just a few minutes later, I heard a snap to my left and turned to look again, but I still didn't see anything. I started to worry that I was being stalked by something, but it was rare to see large animals in this area, so I continued walking. At some point, I heard a third snap directly in front of me, but now instead of being worried, I was upset. I was convinced that somebody else was out there trying to scare me, so I shouted at what I assumed to be a person to go away, and everything went just really uncomfortably silent for a moment. But then I started to hear footsteps approaching in front of me, but I couldn't see anything. They got faster and faster until whoever or whatever it was running right at me. I covered my face with my arms instinctively and waited to be attacked by some invisible person, but the footsteps stopped. I slowly lowered my arms, but instead of seeing a person, a bobcat, or even a bear, I saw a huge spider in the middle of a web that I hadn't noticed before. If I would have even taken one more step, I probably would have ended up being bitten. I turned at that, and I ran as fast as I could through the overgrowth and back to the house. I was spooked, but I was out in the middle of the woods, and sometimes things like this happened. I knew this land and the house well, so I pushed through the night, and the next 2 days, nothing out of the ordinary happened. I started yard work by the second week, staying out of the house, and it wasn't bad. I'd actually found some old trinkets from my childhood that I'd buried under a tree, in fact. While I was picking up fallen branches from a storm the previous night, I noticed a clump of, hair was caught in one of them. I remember its color being brown and black and considered the possibility of it being a rare encounter with a bear, but there were no tracks that I could see. I brushed it off again, but I was starting to think that maybe someone else was staying on the property, and that really upset me. I decided to stay up late to see if I could catch the person in the act. Nothing happened until around 2 a.m. I remember everything so vividly because of how terrified I was as well, and this is what happened. So, it started with branches crunching and the sound of a wheelbarrow that I'd been using earlier falling over. I readied my flashlight and a small knife just in case whoever it was got violent, I guess. I heard them step onto the front porch and pull at the screen door, but they quickly abandoned it and instead started walking around the house. I could hear them scraping something sharp against the house, and I was furious over that. I stood up and shined my flashlight at the nearest window that I assumed the person was standing near, and shouted at them, "I have a weapon, get off this property now." Everything stopped for a moment, and I was positive that whoever it was had left until I heard something slam against the window so hard I was surprised that it didn't break. My flashlight shined on the person, and at first I wasn't sure what I was looking at. It had long, dark hair with eyes that were way too big for its face. Its skin was wrinkled and reminded me of sort of like a naked mole rat. It pressed its face against the glass and fogged it up with its breath. I heard it run around the house several times and bang on every wall, window, and the door every time it passed them. This went on for hours as well, and I was just too scared to move or do anything. I was completely alone, being tormented by some strange monster, and every now and then I would get the courage to shine my flashlight and caught a glimpse of the thing. Each time I saw it, it also looked more and more animal-like. In the end, all I could really do was cry and just wait for it to go away. Finally, just after sunrise, the running and the banging stopped, but I didn't dare move until well after 9 o'clock. It took all of my courage to open the front door and see what damage had been done to the house and the yard after the terrifying experience from the night before, but when I did, the strangest thing is that there was nothing. No footprints, no scratches against the house or broken, cracked windows. It was almost like, like I'd imagined the whole thing. But I knew what I saw and had experienced was real. Anyway, nothing else happened for the rest of my stay there, and by the end of the month, my grandfather came to pick me up and take care of the belongings that I'd packed away. I was still terrified by what had happened, but I'd almost convinced myself that I'd imagined it, until my grandfather spoke to me. You see, he told me that he was happy that this land was being sold and how much he hated growing up here. When I asked him why, his answer seemed to validate my experience almost. Now, my grandfather is a very serious, no-nonsense sort of guy. He was the type of person that stayed quiet, but when he did speak, you'd better listen because it was important. He was a hardened war veteran and devoted Christian, so things like paranormal and supernatural were just sort of like fairy tales to him, I guess you could say. He made sure to tell his children and me and the rest of my siblings and even my cousins that too. He told me how his mother, my great-grandmother, would always try to scare me and his sisters with stories about the land being guarded by monsters. The story says that these monsters, hybrids is what he called them, were the children of falsely accused witches. The people living in the area back then, when this was going on, claimed that the children were part witch and part animal and needed to be killed, so they were left in the forest to die. He said that when the witch children died, they came back as spirits and claimed the woods as their own, and any unwelcome visitors would be tortured until they were literally scared to death. Just how their falsely accused mothers would be scared when they had been killed too. My grandfather said that he didn't believe in much outside of religion, but he believed that the hybrids were real and that he had been tormented by one when he tried to go hunting in the woods for the first time and shot his first deer. He believed that he had upset something by killing an innocent animal and never stepped foot on the land with a weapon, and they finally left him alone. Now, maybe this is a foolish thing to believe in, and who knows, maybe I did just imagine the whole thing, but I believe that the story my grandfather told me is true, simply because we both had very similar terrifying experiences. If I'd had a camera, I would have tried to take a picture of the creature, or if I could draw, I would draw something, I guess. But I remember every detail about what I saw, and it will be burned into my memory for as long as I live. I guess the saddest thing about all of this, though, is that all of my childhood memories seem tainted now because of this experience, and now I don't think I'm going to miss this land as much as I first thought. It didn't take long for the land and the house to be sold too. The hybrids or whatever is out there can be somebody else's nightmare for now, I guess. Because one night, for me, was more than enough. I grew up in a small rural town where, well, pretty much nothing ever happens. The sort of place where it wasn't unusual to leave your doors unlocked, and your closest neighbours are like a mile or so from your house. Our family also had this giant old cat, Tag, who was a bit of a drama king, but we loved him. Now, one summer when I was around maybe 9 or 10 years old, the cat starts going absolutely ballistic. Tag generally slept in my room, curled up next to me until I fell asleep, and then would get up to do whatever cat things that he did at night. Occasionally, he would meow or try to wake me up on unfortunate nights when he could see the bottom of his food bowl and needed a midnight snack. Usually, if I ignored him, he would give up or rarely go to try and wake up my mum instead. This night, however, he bangs against my parents' bedroom door until he gets in and is meowing loud enough to wake us up. Our bedroom doors were next to each other, and I call to Tag to come to bed because it's about 2 a.m. He's having none of it though and is carrying on still. My mum gets up, goes down to the kitchen, and then huffs back up with Tag on her heels, still meowing insanely. She said that his bowl had plenty of food in it, and he just walked her to the door of the kitchen. Tag was an indoor-outdoor cat, but had his own cat door through the garage, so there was no need for one of us to let him out. My mum said my brother must have left the kitchen door open and just the screen door was shut, but she wasn't holding it open forever for the cat to just stand there and not go out. So she shut the kitchen door and went back to sleep, firmly shutting her bedroom door this time so Tag couldn't let himself back into her room. I always kept treats for him in my room though and offered him one, but he was still meowing at their door, trying to get them up. I grabbed him, bring him into my room and shut my door to try to get him to sleep. I lay in my bed trying to go back to sleep and Tag meows at my door wanting back out. I finally open my door and he bolts back downstairs towards the kitchen, and that's when I heard what sounded like a door slamming. I have 3 older siblings though, and someone is always up watching TV or running to the bathroom, so I don't really think too much of it. The cat finally stalks back into my room, but instead of curling up in my armpit like usual, he sat at the bottom of my bed just staring at my door. I fell asleep until morning when some commotion wakes me up, and I pad down to the kitchen to find my parents on the phone with the police. You see, they got up like usual to get ready for work, and while making coffee, my mum went to grab her rings from the little jewelry dish that she had by the sink, because she would take them off in the evenings to rinse dishes and load the dishwasher and whatnot, but discovered that the dish was now completely empty this morning. A small town, so the sheriff sends a deputy over, and when my dad walks out to meet them, sees the ATV is missing from out back. The key is off the key ring. My brothers are all up at this point too, and we're all freaked out that while we were sleeping, some robber must have come in and removed the ATV key and saw an opportunity to take my mum's rings. They were asking if we had any clue when it happened, and my parents say no. My mum asked my middle brother, who was a freshman in college and home for the summer, what time he ended up off the couch last night and if he heard anything. He said that he went to bed at about 10 or 11 and asked what she meant, as his bedroom was in the basement and he wouldn't have heard anything in the kitchen. She said, "But you were in the living room off the kitchen when I went to feed the cat and shut the door that you left open. And I told you not to sleep on my couch and go to your bed as I went back upstairs." He told Mum that he was apparently in the basement since dinner and never went out or came upstairs again. He watched a movie in the basement living room before going to bed in his own bedroom. She goes white and realizes that the cat must have been trying to warn us that someone had came into the house, and the robber dove onto the couch and covered up to hide when she came to the kitchen and exited after she went back to bed. The cops said that for someone to be that brazen, they probably knew our family, knew our habits, but didn't count on the cat being so overprotective and had probably intended to steal more, but was afraid the cat may wake the whole house or something. It's been over 20 years since this happened, and the robber was never caught, but it is unnerving to think that it was probably somebody who had been to our home before, as a friend perhaps. All I can say is that I thank God for our cat. So I, a 25-year-old male, am into urbex. It's something that I often do alone and during the day as well, typically early dawn. And this story reaffirmed that decision for me. So one night, I was out drinking with some buddies and my hobby came up later in the night. The place that we were at was starting to die down, so they asked me if there was anywhere cool nearby that we could go to. The first place that popped into my head was an old abandoned factory that was in the woods, probably maybe 5 or 10 minute drive away, and we went. Now, I didn't quite remember the path to get there. You have to sort of leave the trail at some point. There was also cloud cover, so visibility was super low at this point. And one of them is pretty unathletic thanks to diabetes, so I had them stay on the trail as I fumbled around in the dark to make sure that we were going in the right direction. When I finally got back, they asked how far out I went because they heard something walk by parallel to the trail. I shook it off and dismissed it, probably was just a stray dog or something, and led them into the woods until we hit the fence. I then start leading them along the fence to the hole that somebody else cut forever ago, and when we were getting close, I begin to hear footsteps that weren't ours, maybe 15 feet to the right of us, same side as the fence, and I stopped dead in my tracks. In that moment, my entire body was screaming at me to run, and the only thing that went through my head at that moment was those were human. I turned back to my friends, and judging by the looks on their faces, they heard it too. I told my friends that we should skip this for tonight and we should head back. They quickly agreed and started back to the trail as I stayed behind to make sure that whoever was there didn't follow them. As I waited for them to get further away, I didn't hear or see anything move, and once I assumed that they were back at the trail, I took off running after them and we quickly made it back to the car in one piece. Since then, I've chalked it up to some homeless dude going to the same place to crash for the night. But it did feel like they were following us, and for whatever reason, that triggered my fight or flight super hard that night, which is really odd for me. I, a 28-year-old female, was in my first year as a physical therapist at a large hospital chain. And although I was inside of the hospital, I worked in a small outpatient clinic where patients came to me for appointments and left. As the newest therapist, I was given the late shift from 9 to 7:30 that catered to those who needed therapy and also had to work during the day. We were usually pretty slow in the evening since most of our patients were retired seniors, so I was alone after 5. Like any normal day, I had a new evaluation come in for shoulder pain. Pretty run-of-the-mill sort of stuff. He was a middle-aged man, good-looking, well-educated, and very polite. I did the evaluation and decided to see him twice a week for 6 weeks. I tried to assign him to my assistant, but he refused to be treated by him, stating that he would only work with me. That was fine. He wanted later treatment times anyways, and my assistant went home before I did. Our first few weeks of treatments go by. He was really kind and charismatic. I started to look forward to treating him as we shared a lot of the same interests. He even started waiting for me to lock up and walking out by my car in the parking garage with me. I hated the parking garage, especially when it was dark, so I welcomed him walking me to my car. At some point in our treatments, though, I noticed a sort of shift in him. Our light small talk started to turn a little bit more flirty. From him, anyways. I was happily married and not flirting back, but as any woman knows, some men can confuse our niceness with flirtation. He started making advances and asking me out to drinks after therapy. I politely declined and tried to circle back to talking about his therapy. He seemed agitated by that, though, and started to become less and less compliant with the exercises. He stopped talking as much as well, and I could just tell that the mood had shifted. This day, I decided that it would be best not to walk with him to my car. I didn't tell him this at first, so he went out of the clinic and waited by the elevator for me to lock up. I really wasn't sure what to do and couldn't call my partner as they were out of town on business. So I opened the door from the clinic to the hall where he was and told him that I had paperwork to catch up on and would see him at his next appointment. He looked at me, though, with such anger in his eyes and started walking faster and faster back to the door that I was at. Luckily, I was able to close the door and flip the lock before he made it to the door. He pushed the handle to try and get back in and, realizing that it was locked, stepped back. Of course, this door is essentially a giant window, and he would see me on the other side freaking out but trying my best to conceal it. He told me to let him inside and that he could wait with me while I finished my notes. I said thank you, but I had a lot to do. He insisted, and I declined again. He pushed once again on the door, and when it didn't open quickly, turned around angrily and went back to the elevator. I was shaking and terrified that he would come back, so I went to the private offices and locked that door as well. I grabbed a large dowel rod that wouldn't do much to him, but made me feel a little bit better to have, I guess. At this point, I knew that I couldn't leave, as he knows where I park and what car I drive and could be waiting for me. I called security for the hospital, and luckily one of the guards was doing his rounds close by and said that he would walk me to my car. We head out to my car, and I see my patient parked a few spots down from me inside of his car. When he sees me and the guard walking towards my car, he backs up and pulls away. I thank the guard and get in my car. I drive a few loops before going home to make sure that I wasn't being followed, and luckily I wasn't. Now, the next day I go to my boss and I tell her what happened. She accuses me of being paranoid and says that I need to continue to treat him. I ask her about having another therapist stay late with me, and she says that she'll ask a few people, but not to get my hopes up, as nobody likes working the late shift. I work my normal day, dreading the next day, knowing that it is when I'm scheduled to see him again. That evening, I call my brother and ask him to come to the clinic when this patient was supposed to be there and wait in the waiting room. Thankfully, he agrees. The next day, it's time for this patient to come in, and no one is there. The patient was always early to his appointment, so I was really surprised by that. 15 minutes turns to 30, and he's still not there. I decided that I would do the right thing and wait long enough, but eventually I just locked up and myself and my brother left. The weekend comes and goes, and by Monday I'm back at work. I had no messages from this patient about the no-show and had no plans to reach out to him despite that being protocol. Lunchtime rolls around and I decide to go to the hospital cafeteria to eat. There are TVs scattered all around and I sit in front of one playing the local news. I occasionally look up at it from my phone, and one of the times I do, I see a familiar face. It was my patient. He was in handcuffs being walked out of his house. The sound wasn't on, but I could read. His name had been arrested under suspicion of multiple murders. My jaw dropped to the floor. Now, the TV had my full attention as 3 pictures of young white blonde women popped up on the screen as his apparent victims. Young blonde white women that looked very similar to myself. It took a while for me to fully grasp what I had just seen, but I went to my manager and told her what I had saw, and apparently not believing me, she searched his name on Google, and sure enough, there were multiple articles and news clips talking about his arrest. She apologized to me for not listening when I expressed my concerns, and told me that I could leave early if I needed. I stayed for the rest of my shift, but told her that I wouldn't work late anymore by myself. By the next shift, I had one of the therapy aides assigned to stay with me until we closed. I ended up transferring to a different part of the hospital that had better hours after a few months, but I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I had gone to get drinks with him or something. Or if I had continued walking to my car with him even. I mean, I was only going to see him for a couple more weeks, so what was his plan? Was I his next target? He's still awaiting trial last I checked, and hopefully will be convicted, so he will be locked far away from anyone else. My husband and father are both farmers, and when they aren't in planting, spring or harvest, fall season, they're in the hay season. And well, they have just begun cutting their waterways and fields a few weeks back, and now they're onto client fields and waterways. My husband is in charge of cutting the hay right now, while my dad has been flipping and baling. My husband, who, let's call him Jay, pulls into his field with his tractor and hay mower. The field is really just an old pasture at an abandoned farm someone can't sell. The house is falling in, the barn has been gone a long time, thanks to a fire, and the only other thing that remains is the corn crib at the back of the property. The grass is really long, and he sees tracks from a vehicle leading up to the crib. He doesn't think much of it. Kids usually trespass on abandoned properties around here to drink and whatnot anyway. Jay starts cutting the field and is almost done when some debris from either the house or the corn crib is laying in the way. Just a big metal sheet, so he picks it up and decides to take it into the crib where it's out of the way. Jay starts approaching the crib when this horrible smell starts wafting into his nostrils. As he approaches, it got a lot stronger, and by the time that he slides the big old wooden door open, he is gagging and has to cover his nose and mouth with his shirt. He decides to just prop the metal piece against the building while he explores for the smell. My husband is an explorer of old and odd things. Don't ask me why he did this. I would not have done this, but I'm not him. He gets to the middle of the aisleway in the crib and sees this dark goo seeping from the second level in the crib. He climbs up a few rings on the old wooden ladder to get a better view of where the goo was seeping from, and sees a fresh blue tarp encompassed around something large. Flies and maggots were surrounding the goo seeping from the tarp. He turned and ran and called the cops, and they told him to leave after he gave his statement. We haven't heard anything back, and to be honest, I doubt we will. He didn't sleep well last night, and I'm praying whatever was under that tarp that it was not what we think it was. Nothing in the paper so far either. So far, all we know is that there was something dead laying in the second story of the corn crib at the old Cunningham home. This happened in 2009 to 2010. So when I met the woman who would later become my wife, we started renting a small house within the city limits. I was in the process of beginning a new job, and circumstances prevented me from staying in the house with her for the first week. Each morning, we would talk on the phone during my drive to work. She explained to me each morning that she had struggled to sleep the previous night. She described sounds that were keeping her awake, like someone running through the house, objects falling off the kitchen counter, doors slamming. After 3 days, I made arrangements to go ahead and move in with her. I was convinced that someone was breaking in and harassing her. She was convinced, however, that she was sharing the house with a ghost. I took the workday off the third day, and it took me about 8 hours to get everything moved in. I was taking a break in our bed, still fully dressed, when I felt something or someone tugging on my pant leg. I remained motionless, hoping that it would happen again. After a few seconds, it did happen again, much more aggressively this time. I felt a hand firmly placed on my leg just before it grabbed my jeans and started pulling. She was on the bed next to me, and nobody else was with us. We have no pets either, as it's not allowed. I immediately started having the same experiences throughout the night too, as she had described over the phone. It was like someone was destroying our kitchen, but nothing was ever out of place. There was running, as she described, which sounded like a smaller person, maybe a child. I woke up one night to someone standing next to my bed. I heard giggling, then the individual bolted out of the room as I turned my head. It was too dark to notice any features, and over the course of 8 months, many unusual things happened. But to make a long story short, I'll skip ahead to my last experience, and perhaps the most frightening too. So, I was alone in the house waiting to join an online seminar. I was sitting on my couch with my laptop on the coffee table ahead of me. I heard the back door slam shut, and a person began running quickly through the house. These steps were heavier, and this person was moving quickly. Given the design of our small house, this person was running in my direction, so I shot up and ran out of the house. I didn't stop until I reached the street, and that's where I remained until my wife returned. As I was standing by the street, though, I was looking back into the house, and a balloon from a recent party made its way from the kitchen into my bedroom, then back into the kitchen moments later. It genuinely felt like I was watching someone searching for me, going room to room, all while holding this balloon. This was the last thing that happened to us because, for some really odd reason, it just stopped after that. We even continued living there for another 4 years. I would give pretty much anything to experience it again too, and I know that sounds weird, but I would try to be less afraid, I guess, and I would approach the situation more analytically. My wife, on the other hand, was never afraid of it. Unfortunately, my wife passed away a few years ago. I know she would have enjoyed sharing her story here too, and I still drive by that house occasionally, and no one has ever moved in. So, I've only ever really told this story to a handful of people, and for the most part, I feel like they don't really believe me, due to the similarities with a certain popular demonic movie series which came out well after these events. But in any case, I've decided to tell this story. So, when I was 12 years old, my mum and I found a Ouija board in a toy store and thought that it would be fun to play with. We took it home, but it didn't really do anything. The next night I slept at a friend's house, and I distinctly remember this because it was the first time that I got drunk. The next morning my mum picked me up and I was hungover, but she didn't seem to notice. We drove to the local cemetery and went to her brother's grave who died when he was 2 or 3. She told me that she had a friend over that night, and her baby brother spoke to them through the Ouija board, and he told her some terrible stories, apparently, and made up a story about one of the older siblings jumping on him, which is what she'd been told. She started messing with the Ouija board a lot after that too, and whatever it was, always said that it was her brother. Within that week, I had a friend whose dad actually ended his life. I'd walked to his house the day of, too, and his dad told me that he'd been out all night and was acting strange, so I left. I'm sure now that my friend had already passed by this time, and he admitted to everything that night to my friend's mum and brother. Shortly after that, I went to my mum's friend's house and was watching TV while they played with the Ouija board. They called me over telling me that my friend who had just died wanted to talk, but when I got onto it, it just went to nonsense, really, and I really don't remember a lot after that. My aunt stayed the night shortly after her and my mum played with the board. The next morning, my aunt said that she had a weird dream that the living room wall was covered with blood. Our cat started paying a lot of attention to said wall after this too, which was really weird. He would just sort of sit there and stare, bobbing his head around like he was watching a fly or something. But one night, my mum went to the neighbour's house and I was alone in my room and heard a really loud thump in the living room. I later described it as if someone dropped one of our very heavy candles to the floor from the ceiling. But after this, my door handle moved, which I distinctly remember. I was so scared that I just completely froze, but after a few minutes, I managed to call out to see if my mum was home. It was a small house, so I would have heard her. I opened the door and I didn't hear anything. There was nothing out of place in the living room, but in the kitchen, every door that could have been opened was wide opened and nobody was there. I ran to the neighbour's house crying and they came to investigate. I don't remember much after that, just that my mum and aunt buried the Ouija board somewhere and after it, nothing else happened. Several years later, I tried to talk to my mum about this, but she refused, saying that even talking about it scared her too much, so I'm not sure if she experienced anything more or not, but what I experienced, I'll never forget. I'm 57 years old now, but this is a memory that just never goes away, never fades. In 1986, I stopped in Topeka, KS. It was on my way back from working in Yellowstone National Park for the summer. My friend had also just graduated from high school a few years before and had moved to Topeka with his parents. I stayed about a week. His parents invited me to stay an extra day for their family reunion before I headed back home. And we drove out into the country for their family reunion in this old beater car and spent all day with his extended family. In the late afternoon, we made our way back in his old beater car with the broken gas gauge. We ran out of gas, and he said that we were probably 6 to 7 miles from the nearest gas station, pre-cell phone. We were trying to figure out what to do when suddenly a van with no windows pulls over and asks us if we need help. When you're young, you think that these things just miraculously happen for you, right? When you're older, you know a bit better. We tell him, though, that we ran out of gas. A friendly enough man offers to take us to the nearest gas station, so we get into the van to discover that there are a total of 3 men in the vehicle. There are no seats in the back. We're just sitting on the floor of what appears to be a work-type, beat-up old model white van when we clearly hear the men discussing doing us harm. The driver says that he knows a good place to go. The other man in the passenger seat, now eyeing me, agrees that he's in and nods approval. Only one man sitting near us says that he's not in and doesn't want to be involved in this at all. That he's got a baby now and he's not cool with this. That he doesn't want any part of it. The driver in the passenger seat rider said something under their breaths that I couldn't hear. There was an angry silence while the driver thought this over, and in my mind I just prayed one word: help. My mind felt like I was stuttering thoughts. Part of me was in denial, another part was in shock. Fear hadn't even set in yet, to be honest, just like a jolt to the system of unreal horror happening to someone else, because an hour ago I was completely safe without a care in the world. And now, the absurd idea of someone doing something to me. And yes, I was acutely aware that sexual assault and murder was on the cards here, and leaving us somewhere nobody would find us. Those things were flipping through my mind. And have you ever been to Kansas? Lots of lonely, god-forsaken, desolate roads to pretty much nowhere out there. If at this point the third guy changed his mind or simply said just let him out first, I wouldn't be sharing this with you right now. They stopped talking to each other eventually, and they'd never spoken to us at all from the moment that we entered the van. My friend and I didn't speak to each other at all, too. We barely looked at each other. We were just afraid, I think. I could hear the clanging rattle-trap van's noises and the tires on the road. I saw my friend flexing as if to warn that he would fight to defend himself, while they were discussing where they would take us. And everything just felt so, I don't know, surreal. But the guy in the back, that guy said no. And just like that, the driver pulled over and the guy in the back opened up the side door and let us out, and it was over. The air smelt fragile and tainted somehow, though. The ground looked different, like I couldn't quite trust it. My friend looked as shaken as I felt, and we had just survived a close encounter with shark-like predators, the blackest of evil. I looked at the gas station in the late afternoon waning sunset just before dark. That gas station had transformed itself into a beacon of shining light now, a safe haven of shelter and safety, and I knew once we got into that gas station that there was no way that I would walk back to that car. A white van with no windows pulling away from us felt surreal, I suppose, like looking at it might give it power to suck us up into the vacuum of ill intent that it had. Today, I can still see that van pulling away, a sort of mirage from a nightmare that had crossed over into my waking reality. So if I typed up everything that has happened and everything leading up to this, it would be a book. Instead, I'll try and keep it as short as possible, so apologies in advance if it's a little bit long. So, I was like 19 or 20. It was 2013 to 2014, and I was in an extremely abusive relationship where I became pregnant. Most of the paranormal stuff happened post-physically leaving the relationship, but I'll begin with the little things that occurred while I still lived with my ex. So we lived in a basement apartment in New York, and on my nights while we watched TV in bed, the bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling in the bathroom would fade on and off by itself, almost with intention. My gut told me too that something was trying to get my attention. I stared at it, and every time that I would look away, it would happen again. And no one was pulling the chain, mind you, to turn it on or off or anything. It was bizarre, but someone brushed this off, right? Well, another night, in the storage room next to our bedroom that nobody ever entered, mysteriously a stool dropped hard to the ground. It startled us, but again, we just sort of dismissed it. My ex was weird about always having music playing while we slept, and for some reason, I didn't think too much of it, and I sleep very well, so I didn't mind the noise. One night, though, out of nowhere, the radio volume went full blast as we slept without anyone touching it. Again, something most would brush off, but it was a little bit weird. Something curious I'll add to is that early on in the relationship, during the honeymoon phase, when everything was bunnies and rainbows, I would sometimes catch my ex staring at me with a very sort of intense gaze that gave me predator sort of prey vibes. I asked him, laughing once, what was wrong with his eyes, because while his eyes were already dark, it seemed like they had intensified right in front of me. But it was also late, so I just dismissed this as my mind playing tricks. In hindsight, though, he reacted too relaxed to what I had said. But he was off in general, so I didn't press him. But now to the heavier stuff. So, the very night that I escaped my ex, a horror movie in itself, my cousin let me stay in an apartment that she was temporarily staying at. She lived high up in a brick apartment building, had no pets, lived with her husband and toddler, and I slept in her son's room that night with the door and the window shut. It was a pretty empty room, just a crib, my twin mattress on the floor and a table. I was of course very depressed and afraid that night, but in the early morning hours, while laying on my back staring at the ceiling, I felt something on my upper left thigh, and out of the corner of my eye I saw what seemed like a small, dark, cat-like in its movement creature. I froze, but I was able to move, but it just sort of curled up on my thigh, stared at me a bit, and then just gracefully leapt off. I didn't look at it, I was in just too much shock, I think. But when I did look over that way, it was gone. I got up like normal and was going through way too much emotionally to even discuss this with my cousin, who was a busy person getting ready for work anyway. But fast forward, and I've now moved back to my parents' home in Florida. Anxiety and depression is at an all-time high, but I have to push through, right? I had about 1 month to get healthy for my due date, and I was very much going through it. The worst time of my life, in fact, I think. Being harassed from afar by my ex daily, terrible threats, coming to terms with my failed relationship, the abuse I endured, etc. I isolated myself to fear and depression mostly. And this is when things got really weird. I was so afraid of my ex coming down to Florida, breaking into my house and harming me, that I would sleep in my mother's bed while she watched TV for the remainder of my pregnancy. She later on told me that on my nights that she'd look over at the bedroom door as I slept and saw a shadowy figure, a silhouette of a person that seemed like it was facing or watching me sleep. She also said that she would see it peering over the empty crib. My son wasn't born yet. She kept this from me for my mental health until later on, but after giving birth I was still very much depressed, but I was taking care of my son as best as I could. I was going to therapy and stuff too, and I was constantly fighting with my family. One night too, I let my PTSD get the best of me and had a very big fight with my family members, and I ended up sleeping in jail overnight. Turns out, while I was in jail that night, my father, who had nothing to do with the fight, experienced the same exact cat creature encounter as I did, down to every last detail that I had not told him. He claims that he was in bed and felt something scurrying in the room. Then he felt something on his left thigh, looking out of the corner of his eye and stuff, and I had not told him any of this, mind you. Now one day, we were talking about my ex and all the strange things happening with 2 guests in my living room. My mother had a small religious altar with 2 candles in it, and they were lit. They were really sturdy candle holders too that she had had for like forever. When suddenly, as we were speaking of a dark topic, one of them just spontaneously burst. Glass broken in place and it just went everywhere, and my guests were spooked and so were we. I think it's important to note that the house that I was living in, I had lived in for like over 14-ish years of my life at this point, so it's not like the house itself was haunted. This was all very new to me though, and it felt very much attached to me in some way. After all, it seemed to follow me even in my cousin's apartment in a different state. I would hear knocks in threes all over my house, sometimes at my door, and my mother would tell me not to open it. Most times it would be within the house, on surfaces around me. You know how certain surfaces or materials just sort of sound different? I'll try to give an example. So I was hanging up my son's baby clothes on a drying rack with my headphones in. I was very focused. I take out my headphones and suddenly hear 3 knocks within the house, followed by a loud bang and my son crying. I ran to his crib down the hall and grabbed him. Didn't see anything that had fallen, but it made me feel very uneasy because of the timing. I just felt like something saw me take a headphone out at that precise moment and decided to act. We consulted our church, my therapist, etc. I tried many different things to remove whatever this was. Getting rid of items, praying, cleanses, you name it. I don't know what did it, but the combination of things seems to have worked. The final experience I attribute to this paranormal episode spanning many months, if not longer, was sort of like sleep paralysis, I guess. I was sleeping in my room by myself and I woke up in the pitch black darkness. I couldn't move, tried to scream for my mum, but nothing would come out. And I heard what I can only describe as like demonic growling in my ear. I shut my eyes hard for fear of seeing anything in that moment. I said a prayer in my mind and I felt as if I was released, but my heart was beating super fast. Thankfully, that though seemed to be the end of anything paranormal for me for many, many years. All in all, after everything that I've been through, I fully believe now that this was demonic in nature, and knowing my ex and his family dabbled in some dark stuff for their own gain, it makes me wonder if whatever was attached to him attached itself to me, or at least attempted to. I would appreciate too if anyone could provide their own thoughts on what I may have been experiencing. But thanks for listening. It's good to get all of this off of my chest. Around May 2019, I became sort of oddly obsessed with the paranormal. I read a ton of books, Amityville Horror, and all of the Ed and Lorraine Warren books too. And it was through this obsession with the paranormal that I learned of a supposedly satanic castle in my local area. Firstly though, I live in a county in Scotland that is dotted with a few large towns and a lot more villages. There's nothing much to do around here, but there's a lot of great places to explore, I suppose. I usually go cycling with a friend if the sun's out, that is, and that's how we always get to the castle. I don't know how old the castle is, to be honest, although articles say sometime around the 1200s. The castle itself is hidden deep in the forest and is pretty tough to find. So far, as I know anyway, there are 3 ways to get to the castle, 2 of which require you to trudge through a lot of mud and crisscross your way down a pretty steep slope. But when you reach the castle, the first thing you'll see is the larger tower-like structure protruding through the trees. Below is a stone archway, which is usually home to a makeshift fireplace, which I'm guessing people use when they camp here. Beyond that is a towering stone wall, and below that are 2 iron gratings, which give a view into the chamber. A set of stone steps lead down to the gratings. If you pass through a small archway in the wall and follow the path down, you'll get to a small entrance which you'll need to sort of crouch through to get into the chamber. Passing through a small corridor will bring you to the cathedral-like chamber itself, and standing towards the gratings on the left is a stone stairway that winds down until you come to a blocked-off wall. Now, this is where it gets a little weird, but bear with me. The castle was supposedly built by a necromancer, who made a deal with the devil to summon an army of goblins to build the castle itself. As such, many burned-out candles can be found in the chamber with a lot of sinister messages written on the wall. Me and my friend cycled a lot here in May of 2019, and there were a few odd occurrences. The first I remember was when I was standing at the gratings outside the chamber. I heard a sort of sharp whistle behind me, but when I turned around, there was nobody there. This obviously could have been a bird, but just swooped down behind me, but it still spooked me a little bit, I have to admit. The second time, me and my friend were coming up to the castle when we heard what sounded like children playing, but the castle was completely deserted. It's worth noting too that the castle is on a hill of sorts. Down the hill is a river that winds through the forest, and if there were people there, they would have had to have come our way, and we definitely would have seen them if they went down the hill. The third oddity though, me and my friend brought a bunch of candles and matches to take some photos of the illuminated chamber. We lit one and then carried it through the corridor and set it in the chamber. We repeated this process about 3 times, and on the 4th candle, we heard a sort of large hiss coming from inside the chamber, almost as if a large anaconda was in there or something. And man, that terrified me, especially when we ran and we thought that all the dry leaves in the chamber had caught fire. I ran in, but when I did, the candles were still flickering and nothing was on fire. Me and my friend still occasionally cycle to the castle. Nothing strange has happened for a while now, but I feel like the whistle can be easily explained. The voices as we came up to the castle, then seeing that there was nothing in there is a little tougher. But the hiss is what I have the most trouble rationalizing. It was really loud, and it definitely sounded more than just like leaves or something. I've been there, and I just cannot figure out what it was. And that really troubles me. I moved into my new house in March this year with my partner and our son. When we first moved in, the old guy that lives downstairs, his name is G, told us the previous tenant had a dog that died. Apparently, he couldn't bring himself to bury it, so he asked G to bury it for him. He also let us know that the dog's grave was marked with slabs and kind of asked us to stay away from it. In the summer, we started digging up the garden to replant grass as the garden was full of moss. G came out and informed us that we would need planning permission from the council to dig up the garden. I checked, and this isn't true and never has been. When we got to where the slabs were for the dog's grave, we sort of dug around it a little to lift the grass, with no intentions of moving the slabs. But my partner informed me that he had found barbed wire. To start with, we assumed it came from the wire fence at the back of the garden, as it's really close to it. My partner and his friend tried to dig up all of the barbed wire, but instead of leading to the fence, it surrounded the grave, going deeper into the ground. We had to cut it and stop digging at some point. Since then, I've spoken to the family and friends about it, and every single person has said that I should dig it up just in case it's not a dog. But what do you guys think? Should I dig up the garden? A few other things too that could possibly be red flags here is that I live in the UK and we have big outdoor bins where I live. We have like 3. G keeps his in his spare room for storage and pays another neighbour to use their bins. He also has a big white van that he keeps parked far away from the house. Once he had the van here painting parts of it black, and my sister saw a bed in the back of it too. I don't even want to know what's back there, but I'll also admit that this could be nothing. I mean, I do watch a lot of true crime and could be reading far too much into it. It truly could be just absolutely nothing, but I don't know. What do you guys think? So I live in Atlanta, and right now we're having a moment. About a month ago, a woman walking her dog in Atlanta's Central Park was unfortunately stabbed and mutilated along with her pit bull. The brutality shocked the city to its core and has everyone on edge. And to add to that, another woman was followed home from a gas station after leaving work as a bartender and was kidnapped and then murdered too. This means that we have a whole bunch of really scared women in the city. Anyway, I work very close to the park where the woman and her dog were killed, and I have been extra careful since it happened. Last night, I was working alone and I had scheduled a new client for a 5 p.m. appointment, thinking that I would be done by 7:15 at the latest. However, she needed some extra work done, so it was after 8:30 by the time that I walked her outside to her car. We stood talking in the parking lot for a couple of minutes before she got into her car. Here I should add too that my parking lot is really small and fairly secluded because of a large hedgerow and retaining wall. After I made sure that she was safely in her car though, I went back into the salon and locked the doors behind me with the intention of cleaning and locking up, and I was inside for like less than 10 seconds before I turned around and saw a man pulling on the door. There had been no one in the parking lot, mind you, that I could see, and there were no other cars than mine and my client. But this guy just appeared from what seemed like nowhere. As I said, I'm already on edge, so I stood there for a second, not sure what to do, and he stood there staring at me with his hands on the door handle. Finally, I walked up to the door, It's a glass door, so I could see him and he could see me, and I said, "What's up?" I could see that he was surprised that I didn't just unlock and open the door, and he stuttered a couple of times before pointing at the hair product wall and saying, "Oh, I want to buy some of that makeup over there." Here, I noticed that 1, he's got a pretty good black eye on him, and 2, he's wearing a fairly large surgical mask outside, alone, which made me think that he was trying to hide his identity. I told him that's not makeup, that's hair products because this is a hair salon and we're closed. Then I turned out all the lights at the front of the salon and walked towards the back wall to hit those lights as well. And once I had all the lights out, I could see him, but he could not see me, so I just sort of watched him because I didn't want to go right out after that. He sort of ended up pacing back and forth by the front door for what must have been a couple of minutes, and then he walked to the upper part of the parking lot, above the retaining wall, and stood sort of half between a tree and a bush. He would stare at the salon door, then crouch down, then walk away all nonchalant, then come back to his hiding spot and stare at the door again. After watching him do this about 3 times, I decided on the next time that he walked away, I was going to make a run for my car. And as soon as he turned his back and started walking towards the direction of the park, I ran out, locked the door, and sprinted the 20 feet to my car in a full-on panic. And thank God for keyless entry. I have no idea what he was up to or if he was really a serial killer or anything. Probably not, right? Probably just trying to rob me. But what I do know is that he definitely saw me in the parking lot talking to my client, and I did not see him. I also know that if I had not locked the door, I would have had a much different night, I think. There's no question in my mind that he was going to do harm to me in some way at least. As a side note too, lots of people have asked if maybe he was homeless, and I absolutely do not think so. And while he definitely scared me, he did not give off the desperate vibe of a lot of the homeless or mentally ill, addicted people that I've encountered in the past. These people don't scare me really. Mostly, I think I just feel sad for them and try to help them in some way. But this guy, he had every alarm in my body screaming at full volume. About 4 years ago, my wife and I planned an evening out for her birthday. My parents babysat, and we went out to a restaurant, and because I drove, I didn't drink, so we didn't bother going anywhere else after we were done in the restaurant. But because the night was still young, we decided to go on a long drive. The location, which is relatively nearby, is a large national park. We decided to take a drive up there and just sit and chat under the stars. When we arrived up there, the country roads were pretty much dead, and I found a nice open parking area to pull the car up in. We sat inside the car talking, we started making out, and things carried on until we began going a little further, and at no point did either of us leave the car though. As we were doing the deed, headlights lit up our vehicle though, and instantly we were like, oh my goodness, there's someone driving by, I hope they don't see what we're doing. For me, it was an instant turn-off, so I quickly pulled up my trousers and I ceased. I thought the car was just a fellow traveller passing by, but to our surprise, the car pulled into our area and began circling us. I put the keys in the ignition and said, let's go. I drove out of the parking area onto the road and back to the main connecting road, and the car followed. Once on the main connecting road, we could see the make, model, and colour of the car that was following us. It was a dark red Ford. I drove quickly, but not recklessly. The car matched my speed, though, and was right on my tail. At this point, neither of us were 100% sure if we were just being paranoid or if this car was really meaning to follow us, so I said, I know what I'll do. I'll pull off at that random turning point and see what they do. So I put my foot down, and after a few 100 yards down the main road, I made a left-hand turn down a really narrow side lane. I pull up after a while on this side road, stopped and turned my lights off, and watched in my rearview mirror to see if the red Ford carried straight on the main road or if he turned off. And a few seconds later, there he was. He had turned off and was now coming down this narrow lane towards us again. At first we were blinded by his headlights, but I was sure that it was him. My wife said, though, "I don't think it's the same car, you know." And I said, "No, it is, look." And as he got closer, it became apparent that it was the same car, so I drove down the road further, and luckily I found a space big enough to turn my car around. I spun around and back to the main road again, and he followed. Now back on the main road for a second time, I did now decide to speed. As I was heading towards the built-up city centre, he kept behind me the whole way, and eventually we stopped at a red light and he was right behind. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw his face. To this day, I can still see that face too. He was a middle-aged man, slightly tubby with glasses and thin grey hair. At this point, I was freaked out. We both were, in fact. I said to my wife, "I'm going to keep driving and try and lose him, but I'm not driving home, so he doesn't know where we live," and she agreed. We drove around for maybe another 10 minutes. He was still following too. At this point, I was beginning to consider the possibility of calling the cops, but I thought that I would give it a few more minutes of trying to lose him. Thankfully, a few streets later, he turned off and was never seen again. Now, I know it's a real possibility that he may have been a dogger. Not sure if this is a thing in America, but it's basically where strangers meet other strangers in the wilderness to get it on. But if he were a dogger, or if he thought that we were doggers, we're not, then surely he would have understood that we weren't interested when we actively drove away. The fact that he followed us into the built-up city for like 25 minutes or more makes me think that he had more sinister intentions. To this day, this is still the weirdest moment that I've had in my life. I'm a 32-year-old man from and currently living in Cumberland County, New Jersey, which puts me about 45 minutes away from Philadelphia and 45 minutes away from the Atlantic Ocean, while at the same time being only about maybe 15 minutes away from Delaware Bay. After high school, I went up into the Army as an intelligence analyst for a while. When I got out, I moved to New York City and worked as a project manager for a construction company, until I met my wife and decided to move back to New Jersey to be closer to our family since she was pregnant with our daughter. That's just some background on me. So, this happened in October of 2018. It was about 11:45 at night, and I decided to go on my front steps to smoke a couple of cigarettes before I tried to fall asleep. Everyone in the house was already sleeping. It was a pretty clear night, without many clouds in the sky, but there was some fog on the ground, and as I was smoking, I was looking at the fog, and to me it looked like there was sort of movement in it. I know it sounds crazy, but it was almost like there was an invisible sort of camouflaged thing out there that I wouldn't be able to see if it wasn't for the fog hanging on the ground. As I was looking at the fog, I noticed this white truck that had driven by 2 times at this point. I could hear a woman and a man yelling at each other when the truck stops at the stop sign in front of my house, and the woman gets out screaming at the man, then slams the door as he pulls off fast, then proceeds to walk into the woods across the street from me, which is really weird because there isn't really anything back there except for like blue holes until you hit the bay. If I walk out my front door and just keep walking straight, there won't be any houses or civilization at all. Only trees and like artificial lakes, blue holes, left over from sand plants until you hit the Delaware Bay. So at this point, it's been about 5 minutes since the woman walked into the woods when things started going from weird to just unbelievably scary, strange, and the most reality-shattering thing that has ever happened to me. So I'm still looking at the movement that I'm seeing in the fog when I hear this very loud noise come from the woods that sounded a bit like metal being ripped apart. There really isn't a good example that I can give for that sound because it was just so unearthly. I'm sure that it wasn't a natural sound though. That sound lasted for probably about 10 to 15 seconds, then abruptly stopped, and was replaced with a different sound, which I can feel more than I can hear, to be honest. What I mean is, imagine being aware that there's a huge sound happening by you, but it's out of the frequency that your ears can hear. That's the best way that I can describe it. But this sound, though, is constant through the rest of the experience, and this is the point where I will probably lose some people, and I'm aware of how crazy this all sounds, but as I'm getting adjusted to the sound, it sort of feels like something reaches out to me mentally in my own head, but does so without words, and only conveys a feeling of like calm and a heads up or warning for what's about to happen. It kind of felt like whatever it was feeling me out to see how I would react to what I was currently experiencing, like a security check or something. Anyway, as I was having this feeling of calm conveyed to me, I noticed a light in the sky that seemed to have risen out of the woods, I would say about 5 or 6 miles away from me. At this point, it's only a ball of light in the distance, but I just knew that it was coming right towards me, although it wasn't moving very fast. Right after I noticed the light in the sky is when I start to get really, really freaked out, more than I've ever been. In the woods across the street from me, which is no more than 50 yards, all of these orbs of light just start to appear. I could see some which seemed to flicker into existence. These orbs were all white light, which didn't light up the area around them like you would expect from flashlights or something. There were probably about 12, maybe 16 of them, which moved in a totally smooth manner. Besides the trail to get into the woods, the area is so dense and infested with sticker thorn bushes, it simply wouldn't be possible for people to move where the lights were moving, let alone do it completely smoothly. I really am positive that they weren't people with flashlights too, because of the area and the characteristics of the light orbs themselves. In any case, I'm just watching the orbs move around for about a minute, trying to make sense of what I'm actually seeing here, when I look back up to the sky to see a craft coming practically right towards me, with it only being about 1,000 yards away at this point. So I'm sort of going back and forth looking at the orbs on the ground and the craft, which I start to make out better. It was flying very, very low, and I would say it was only about maybe 3.5 to 4 stories off the ground at this point. I see the path that it's taking and see that it's going to pass right in front of me, at an angle in which I'll be able to see underneath the craft and the side of it at the same time. The craft was a single-story, sort of dull black rectangle. I could see underneath the craft and saw that the rectangle was made up of 3 smaller, sort of rectangle panels that fit together to form a larger rectangle. I clearly saw that the craft was made up of 3 panels though. The size is harder to estimate, but I would say that it was about 35 yards long and 20 yards across. Underneath, there were lights flashing in a pattern which would cycle through, then cycle back the other way. In the moment, I thought that the craft was signaling to the orbs on the ground. It didn't make any sound at all, mind you, and all I was hearing is that same sort of buzzing or humming noise that I felt more than I heard. While it was in front of me, though, it was moving really slow, to the point where I don't think a plane with a normal propulsion system could even stay in the air at that speed. I take my eyes off the craft and look back down at the orbs, which are still moving all around, though one was starting to cross the street in front of me. I only took my eyes off the craft for a moment, too, when I looked at the orbs, but when I looked back, the craft was just gone. For whatever reason, when I saw the craft vanish like that too, the reality of what I was seeing really hit home, and I got scared, to be honest. Since my daughter, wife, and mum were all no more than 50 feet away from all of this craziness, I just went inside and I locked the doors. I just felt like I would have been willing to investigate more if it was just my life I was playing with, but I wasn't willing to take that chance with my family's lives. Now, I'll admit that I could have been just paranoid at this point, but I honestly felt like I was being watched for like the next 2 hours. Mind you, I didn't seem to have any lost time from this event, and the entire thing happened only over a period of like 20 to 30 minutes. But looking back on it all now, I question what exactly was going on with the white truck and the woman who walked into the woods at the beginning of this story. I've also done some research and found that there are a good number of reports of people seeing a sort of glimmer man in the woods, which make me think of the movement that I was seeing in the fog. Where I live too is a very active area for UFO phenomenon, which makes sense if something wanted to have access to major cities like Philadelphia, New York, or Baltimore and DC. I mean, what possibly could be a better place to hide than almost inaccessible 1,000 feet deep lakes in the middle of the woods, right? Anyway, I know that this is a bit of a long story, but I wanted to be as detailed as I could. I would really like to hear what all of you guys think about this, though, and if anybody has had a similar experience or know somebody who has, well, I would really love to hear from you. Anyway, thanks for listening to me, and it feels good to finally get this off my chest. This happened last night in Austin, Texas, about 1:15 midnight. I was in my bed when I heard like fanatic knocking. I walked out of my bedroom while the knocking continued again and heard a woman saying, "Please help me," along with crying, but it was faint. I quickly looked out the peephole to see no one there, and no other doors were being knocked on. Just mine, which is odd by itself, but I'm also on the 3rd floor. Why would someone walk all the way up just to my apartment if in distress, right? I think it was a recording too, because if someone really needed help, they would be banging on everyone's door, right? I called the police in any case, immediately, and the dispatcher told me not to open the door and if I had a weapon. I have heard of this tactic before, which is why I was so cautious, while slightly different with it being a recording of a baby crying, though. Just insane, though, when thinking about the statistics of stranger abductions usually result in murder. Also, just so sick to try and prey on people's empathy like that. The police drove by, though, and I saw them using their spotlight to look through the complex, but as of now, I have no idea if anyone was found or by chance someone was hurt, if they found her. I've barely slept with all the possibilities of how this person found me, when they saw me, when they followed me, or if they live in this complex. I'm like 4'10", live alone, and really don't know many people in my area. No family close either. Have they been watching me and know all of this? I mean, it's just making me go crazy. Stay vigilant, though. Don't fall for these tactics, and know that not everything you read on the internet is false. I heard about this a year ago, and I wonder if I hadn't have known about it already, would I have actually have opened the door? Where would I be right now, and would I even be alive? This world can be a really messed up place. Also, I've talked with the management to let them know about what's going on. As of right now, nobody else has reported to them anything similar happening. I'm going to contact the police again for an update, obviously. I was redirected to another PD, but they weren't the ones who responded to the call. I know it takes some time for reports to be filed and all that, so I'm trying to be patient. I just want to know if this has happened to anybody else, I guess. I've ordered a Ring camera, though, and we'll be picking it up shortly. At least this way I could get a video of them if they come back, and it'll help me sleep too. As far as it being a prank, I mean, sure, absolutely it could be, but I'd be more inclined to believe it if it happened to other women in the apartment. Maybe it has, but they haven't said anything. One side of the coin, though, is that it's a very cruel prank that I shouldn't worry about. The other, though, is that someone has been watching me and had something sinister in mind. It's horrifying to think that someone would pull an elaborate prank like this, or real-world things that happen that we never think could happen to us, right? As for guns and self-defense classes, I'll be getting both of these, but they both take time and a lot of money. I don't want to, just get a cheap gun with no training. That won't help much. It will be something that I'll invest my time and money into, though, but for the short security, I can really only get a ring camera and just stay updated with the PD. Anyway, thanks for all your helpful tips like the neighborhood apps and gun safety and all that stuff. I appreciate it a lot during this very scary time, and I'll do my best. So, I just had my baby in April of this year, and he's my first. He's also my world. In February, though, I was around 7 months, and finally I was starting to show. I was a late shower, so the 7-month mark was finally the point where you could say with certainty that I was pregnant if you saw me passing. I live in Arizona as well, so it doesn't get too cold here, and I was wearing a tight sweater that showed off my bump. I was super proud of it. Anyway, I was at a Walmart after work, I think, just picking up a couple of groceries, and I was approached by a lone woman. She was a little shorter than me and had brown hair, and looked around 35 if I had to guess. She seemed normal enough and sweet. She struck up conversation with me about my bump and typical how far along are you, and I can tell that it's a boy by the way that you're carrying, and stuff like that. Again, she was sweet, but she also lingered a little bit too long. I can't think of a reason for this in that particular moment, but the woman gave me a super weird vibe. I let her know that I had to get home to make dinner, and then she asked me for my information. She said that she owned a children's boutique and would love to meet up to give me clothes for the baby or something. This seemed odd for several reasons. Why, as the owner of a children's boutique, would you just give away your merchandise to a stranger that you just met? I politely declined, though, and when she asked to take my phone number down in case I changed my mind, something inside me was just screaming to not give it to her. I let her know that I really was not interested and went to the checkout. For some reason after that interaction, I felt super unnerved, and as I walked out, I looked behind me. She was leaving the store as well. I had already started walking to my car, but it was dark and I was parked far away, so I began to walk faster. I parked far because I had heard walking was good for pregnant ladies, but in that moment, man, I was regretting making that decision. To my relief, she walked to the passenger side of a car in the same row as mine, and I still had a ways to go. I didn't see her get in or anything, but I was relieved nonetheless. When I finally got to my car, I suddenly got the intense urge to lock it as soon as I closed my door. And I am thankful every day that I did, because a millisecond later, the woman sprinted up to my car, violently tried to open the passenger door, and when it didn't open, she banged on the window shouting expletives at me and then sprinted away. I was scared out of my mind, and I peeled out as soon as possible. I didn't even see where exactly she went, but I never went to that location again. Now, I'm not sure what would have happened if I had gone to meet her, or if I didn't lock my car doors right away. I'm not sure what she wanted, but I have heard stories about women who steal babies out of pregnant women's bodies, and I fear that may have been what she was trying to do. I don't know, I don't even like to think about it, to be honest. But I'm telling my story here because I want to make sure that all of you guys stay alert and cautious if strangers, regardless of if they seem normal or even nice, approach you and act like she did. So when I was around maybe 4 or 5, I was getting tucked in for the night, and there was this closet to my right. It was one of those sliding closet doors and could be opened effortlessly. And after my parents went to bed, I closed my eyes and attempted to start drifting off. After around, I would say, maybe 5 minutes, I begin hearing a rattling to my right and I jolt up. Now, I believed I was awake and I would soon be proven wrong, I suppose, but I got up out of my sheets in my dream, stood up, went over to my closet, and when I did, the noise stopped. For a second I thought, maybe I should just go back to sleep, but I was determined to find out what this noise in my closet was. I've never been one of those kids that there's a monster in the closet type, but after this, I definitely looked at my closet differently. I sort of slowly began to open the closet door, and about halfway through fully opening it, a loud screech screamed back and forth through my left and right ear, alternatively, quickly. I quickly covered my ears in sort of a knee-jerk reaction, I suppose, and then the ringing stopped. I looked up and saw what I can only describe as like two flickering red eyes floating there, slowly fading in and out of existence. After a second of sitting there, barely holding back tears, thanks to adrenaline, and everything seeming to have stopped, I was suddenly shoved to my bed by an unknown force, and it began to wrap the blankets around me so tightly that I couldn't move. The blankets loosened, and I began to throw them off, and when they were off, I had every intent to run to my parents' room, but after getting the sheets off, I looked at my door and saw a shadow figure standing next to it, glowing red eyes fixated on me. Now, being a kid, obviously I screamed. If I couldn't go to my parents, then they were coming to me. But after I did, the shadow sort of mimicked the scream in a really creepy way and slapped me full send on my stomach. At that, I woke up with a furious jolt. To be honest, too, after catching my breath, I thought that it was just a nightmare, all in my head. However, I suddenly noticed a sort of burning sensation on my stomach, and I lifted up my shirt to see a bright red hand mark. There was no doubt that it was a hand mark. I mean, it looked exactly like a hand. I screamed once more, and I heard my parents this time practically kick the door down and run to my room. They all saw it too, the hand mark, and we still talk about it to this day, with no clue about who or what it was. I have slowly pieced more info about my old home's history and deaths together, and I'd be happy to share that sometime, but let's just say that there was something weird going on in that house. Anyway, thanks for listening. When I was 15, I found a job in a local newspaper for a live-in babysitter. It was summer, and I wanted to make some money. I lived in a rural area and didn't have transportation to get to a mall or fast food place to work, at the usual jobs for teens. There was no public transportation where I lived, and no jobs in the rural town that I lived in too, so I had to take it. I called the number for the live-in babysitting job, and a man answered. I found out that he was divorced, with 2 young children. They were school age, elementary school, and were home for summer vacation, and he needed someone to watch them while he was at work. He spoke to my mother on the phone, and she agreed to allow me to do the live-in job. As an adult, I questioned so many of her decisions, and certainly this one. But in any case, he picked me up and drove me to the house, and while driving, he told me that he was engaged. He said that his fiancée was his former babysitter, and she was a few years older than I was. As a 15-year-old, this didn't set off any alarm bells. I just thought that it was weird that someone my age would want to be with an older man. He was probably in his maybe late 30s to mid-40s, I would guess. I thought it was weird when I was taking the children for a walk, and a woman who lived in the neighborhood looked at me in a really odd way, like something was wrong about me walking with those children, and when I smiled and waved, she just looked away and sort of ignored me. I didn't give it a lot of thought, though. Just seemed strange, I guess. In any case, the house was a split-level home, a style where the floor levels are split. The main living area and the bedrooms are on the top level, and the lower level has just like a living room area and a single bedroom. and that was my assigned room. Now, not long after I began living in the home to babysit for this guy, he knocked on my bedroom door after I had gone to bed. I was kind of freaked out by this, to be honest, and I opened the door partially to ask what he wanted. He acted all friendly and asked me if I wanted a beer, like he was cool with that, and I simply said no and waited for him to leave and shut the door. The next day, I told him that I no longer wanted to do the job and had him take me home. Now, I didn't fully understand at that time that he was a predator who was definitely trying to groom me into having a relationship with him, but I knew enough to know that something was just not right about the situation, and that he was creepy, and something just told me to get out of there. Okay, so I'm an owner or operator traveling industrial electrician. I also feel for relevance to this story that I should mention that I am a woman. My job takes me everywhere, so being somewhere in the middle of nowhere with strange sounds and critters kind of comes with the territory. So does poor bathroom accommodations, to be honest. A couple of weeks ago, we jumped on a quick turnaround, 4 weeks, at something new to me, a plant that breaks down and processes utility-grade meats. This is basically the stuff that goes into dog food and potted meat, all that wonderful stuff. It's in the uppermost corner of NW, Arkansas, and man, it stinks so bad in this place, and it's still running while I'm there to do the electrical on one of the 4 new process lines or something. It's a large addition, basically a new wing of the building. Unfortunately, though, they don't have a sufficient number of portalets, and the one that they do have, they claim hasn't been cleaned in a while because the crane is in the way. And despite the fact that the site has the equipment to move the toilets so they won't be blocked, that doesn't mean that they're going to do it. So, basically, I make a deal with the boss that I'll be using the bathroom for number 2s at the country store about 7 miles from the site. I noticed the chemical building was set a good distance behind the plant, a very typical placement. Behind it they had like a slab with a condenser, then a patch of grass on a downslope that led to a 4-inch chain-link fence. I could walk around and access a patch of woods with about 4 or 5 degrees of gentle slope before a steep drop-off of about 40. And about 20 after the flat ground, there was a really lovely creek there. And that was the perfect place to pee. So, for the next week, I was in a walk-in ceiling above the boiler room and peed in a bottle mostly. I did go to the woods patch a couple of times to pee, but everything was normal. The first time that it got strange, though, was in the second week. I crossed the fence to pee on the gentle slope patch before the drop-off, and something just came over me not to let my butt face the drop-off. I don't know, it was weird, like the sensation of being watched or something. I stood there and scoped it out to see if maybe another plant worker was there to take a leak, but there wasn't. It was odd, I'll admit, but, I mean, whatever. Back to work. I came out later that day to pee, and still, I just felt like I wasn't alone. The feeling of being watched continued as well, and I just kind of, I don't know, did my business, faced my butt away from the woods, and went back to work. Until sometime in the third week, it was early in the morning and I was peeing in my spot in the woods and something just suddenly let loose. It was the unmistakable sound of a large heavy body falling down the incline. I heard the leaves crunching, the tumbling sound rolling down the hill. I jumped up in midstream, scrambling to pull up my pants. I spun around in the direction of the noise to see what it was. It took me a second of scanning too, and the only thing that I could see that didn't look normal was a sort of black lump at the bottom of the incline near a large rock. I stood for a moment, observing, thinking that it was possibly a bear. But this thing was perfectly still, and no matter how long I looked at it, I couldn't make out any discernible shape. It also didn't move, Like, I was convinced that whatever it wasn't breathing because of just how still it was. I shrugged it off, though, and it was weird, but I went back to work. I spent the next couple of days walking the distance to the field that I parked my truck to pee at. I guess I just was not in the mood to go back to those woods after that. Eventually, though, I broke down and I went back to pee in the woods at some point. I just sort of ignored the feeling of being watched, faced out into the woods down the slope my whole time that I was out there. I repeated this for a couple of days too, until one evening, late in the day, I went to pee, but this time, as soon as I rounded the corner of the chemical building, I don't know how to describe it, but just wave washed over me. It was like when I rounded that corner, every instinctual alarm was telling me to get out of there right now. And of course, as stupid as a human I am, I ignored this instinctual warning and still went to pee. For some reason, and I don't know why, but I just refused to face the down slope this time, and there was like a voice in my head assuring me, just don't look back. Thankfully, I finished peeing with no incident. Then my phone rings, which legit startled me so much, and it was my husband who was looking for me. We work together. I tell him to hang on because I hear the noise of something splashing loudly in the creek, and I turn around, and to this day, I still cannot explain what I saw. It just doesn't remotely resemble anything of this world, I think. I'm going to do my best to describe it, but bear with me because, like I said, I've never seen anything like it. So, you know those Muppets on Sesame Street, whose appendages would stretch out and come back in? Imagine one of those, but all black, like Vanta black, but very fuzzy looking, just like the Muppets on Sesame Street. It ran in a bipedal fashion, but its legs would sort of slink out and get as long as it stepped. Imagine something black and fuzzy with two flailing fuzzy slinkies for legs, running, with matching arms flailing in a similar manner. In its locomotion, its skinny fuzzy body and neck kind of expanded and wobbled up and down too. It was just running west and cut across the creek and, without breaking stride, ran up on the bank. I was kind of in awe for a moment. My mind just couldn't process what I was seeing. Finally, though, I frantically muttered to my husband, "It's wrong, something is really wrong, I need you." Dropped my phone where I was standing and just ran back into the unit. I ended up running into my husband when I got up the stairs from the boiler room, and I must have looked pretty bad because he grabbed me, shaking me a little, demanding to know what was wrong. Obviously, I couldn't really explain to him what I saw at this time. All I could get out was the black thing in the woods. My husband insisted that I show him, so I took him around the back of the chemical building to show him, and the atmosphere wasn't the same. It was much lighter, and nothing like before. My husband looked around, saw my phone on the ground, went and got it, and looked down the drop-off, but nothing. My husband looked at my phone, gave me a strange look, and handed me my phone. He asked me again that night what happened, but when I made efforts to describe what I saw, he seemed to get frustrated. He kept trying to compare it to known animals like a monkey, a bear, a dog, but I told him that it wasn't even close. In any case, obviously I never went to pee there again the rest of the time that I was on that job. But I'm wondering, can anyone here tell me what I could have possibly seen? Like, seriously, what did I see? What the heck was that thing? So our house was built back in 1999, about a year or so before I was born. I've had a few odd experiences in my life too, but the scariest and the craziest was when I was 10 or 11 years old. So my brother's ex-girlfriend and I, we were hanging out in one of the back rooms, now our current roommate's room, watching a movie late one night. My parents and brothers, they weren't home when this happened. since my parents were out on a date at the time, I think. But we were watching a comedy, so I know that this wasn't just my imagination playing tricks on me. And halfway through the movie, she ended up pausing it. She asked, "Hey, did you hear that?" I said, no. What?" She shook her head and we continued watching the movie. About 5 minutes later, she stopped it again with a confused look. She asked again, "Are your parents home yet?" I said, no, they went out on a date not that long ago, so they shouldn't be back yet." After the third time of hearing something, she paused the movie. I got up and opened the door to our hallway, and there I saw what I can only describe as an orb of light move quickly out of the hallway. "What the?" I exclaimed, walking towards the kitchen where it darted to. Now, our hallway is straight, with my room completely opposite of the room that we were in, on the other side. There's also a middle bedroom on the right, and just after that, her bedroom. The entrance to the kitchen is on the left side, but you can actually see it if you're in the hallway. And so, when I saw the orb dart out of the hallway, I didn't see it after that, since I saw it for a brief second. We both walked out towards the kitchen, though, and the cupboards that held our pots and pans suddenly just opened, and our pots and pans flew out and onto the kitchen floor. At the same time, we heard what sounded like muffled voices all throughout our house, going room per room. It was almost like a whole bunch of people were walking through the house, as we felt vibrations on the floor, almost like the whole house was pulsating, to put words to it. It wasn't loud at all, but it's hard to describe fully since it's been a while, but that's the best that I can do. Then I looked towards our living room, and on a glass table, a globe, which was in the middle of the table, moved towards the edge and dropped to the floor. We stood there just sort of watching everything, and after that, it just fell completely dead silent. We ended up going outside after this and waiting for my parents to come home, and a friend of hers came over and she told her what happened. But weirdly, after that, it just never happened again. To this day, I've never had anything like that happen to me ever, and to this day, I still have no clue what actually happened. It must have been some poltergeist activity or something, though, that just randomly sparked out of nowhere. I mean, our house isn't haunted, but I have had some odd things happen to me, for years even, but like I said, nothing like that. What I mean is, oftentimes, I'll hear my name being called out of nowhere, often when I'm alone minding my own business too. Occasionally, I'll think that I'll see shadowy figures, or at least I think they're shadowy figures, walk out of the corner of my eye into the hallway. That's something that would happen a lot when I was a kid too. I think that in my recent years of becoming a born-again Christian, I believe that the activity has stopped, and I've barely had any experiences, which makes me think that maybe it was possibly demonic in nature or something. Now, our house might have been built recently, but that doesn't mean the area surrounding it, before the subdivision that is, doesn't have some history to it. My stepmom, now my dad's current wife, because of parents' divorce in 2013, has even said that she saw a soldier at the foot of her bed when she was falling asleep one time. Or she also said that she saw a little boy that walks into the hallway, but this was just a one-time thing. I don't know, guys. What do you all think? A few years back, my now husband and I were living with my mum. My husband had started a new job where he was working 14-hour shifts and wouldn't get home until like 11 p.m. My brother liked to go out as well, so he also wasn't home. This meant that my mum and I were home alone on Halloween. We lived on a busy street, so we ran out candy around 9 p.m. My mum put a sign on the door and we went to bed. For some background too, we had 5 dogs in the house. And at this point, my brother was about 21 years old and I was 22. My brother has a female German Shepherd Husky mix named Coco, and she's very good at reading our body language. Our screen door had a large window and it didn't lock, and our main door didn't have a view window. In other words, you couldn't really see outside. So the doorbell rings around 11:30 p.m. and I got up instantly and ran to the door. I stupidly assumed without a thought that it was my husband coming home from work. I opened the door without thinking, and there were two very large people wearing black hoodies and black sweats. I knew the screen door didn't lock, so I realized that this was a bad situation. My mum had heard the doorbell as well, so she was also walking to the door. My husband had the keys to the house, so my mum, having good instincts, realizing that it wasn't him, and decided to come with me to the door. I was stunned, to be honest, and didn't say anything, but my mum comes up from behind me and aggressively says, "Can I help you?" But before they could even speak, Coco jumped up at the glass and started barking and growling at them. When her paws pushed on the door, it opened slightly and the two people took a step back. They both just said trick or treat, and my mum said, "Don't you see the sign? We're out of candy." Then the two people walked away. My husband came home maybe 15 minutes later and we told him what happened. Coco for sure saved us from a pretty bad situation. She never acts that aggressively when people come to the door. But anyway, the next morning, we saw on the news a few blocks away that two people that matched the description of the two people that came to our door were shot and killed because they tried to rob the home of an off-duty police officer. The time of the incident was 30 minutes after the two people had come to our door. You know, I think I sort of forgot about this whole thing until recently, but this took place over 10 years ago when I was 15 or 16. I was just a bored teen in a somewhat small town and wanted to get off the computer for a bit, I think. It was late at night, around midnight, maybe 11, when someone like me really should have stayed in, but I felt like just going on a long walk, which I never did, but hey, what's going to happen to me here? It was a chill place. Once you get past the school in the neighborhood, or to one end of the neighborhood, there's a long road with some nice homes on it that heads towards the grocery store, and a bigger road with 4 lanes. This long road has a sidewalk, barely any lights, and goes past a big open area with a horse farm and one small waste facility across from the road from the horse field. The facility is up a slight incline, and between it and the road is a dip in the ground for the rainwater to accumulate and run beneath the driveway, meaning if you drove off the road, you'd basically be going down a small half-pipe right there. So, I walked past the school, past this horse field, and all the way down the long road to the 4-lane road and kept walking. It's now around 1 a.m. I would guess, and the roads are empty, but they're totally illuminated by streetlights, so I felt fine. At some point though, this little car speeds down the road way too close to the sidewalk, and I saw their brake lights come on as they kept driving pretty quickly. And something about the car and how close they drove to the sidewalk just gave me this major feeling of fear and that I needed to just go home. It wasn't a, hey, they came too close to me fear, but it was like a full body feeling that I just had to go. I didn't think this way at the time, but looking back, I feel like it was someone thinking, hey, they look young, should I go back? And holding their foot lightly on the brake pedal just enough to slow down gradually and turn the lights on. So I walked back for a good 30 to 45 minutes, and I was now coming back up to the horse field on this dark road, which meant that I just needed to make it past this wide open area before I was at the school, which basically meant that I was home. This whole time, I kept looking back and watching for cars or someone, but now I was feeling safe because it had been so long and I was on this super dark road. But right before the horse field, there was this big front yard of some country house that's down a dirt road. The front yard had a fence, but it was just posts with like 3 planks going across it, which meant that a person could easily slide between the planks if they just angled themselves right. And I'm getting to the end of that yard when a car speeds by me, and I swear that it's exactly the same shape as the car that passed me before, and I got that same feeling of fear. It was too dark to see the color, but The shape was unmistakable. I see the brake lights light up, and this time they slowed down drastically before whipping the car to the side of the road to go down into the dip at the waste facility, drive up the incline to circle around and drive back out to the road like a madman in the span of probably 3 or 4 seconds. I just want to be clear too that no one in their right mind would have used that dip to turn around even slowly, and whipping the car around that way is abnormal anyways. I swear too that I was stressing so hard and was nearly frozen just watching them do that because I knew that it was the same car and something bad was definitely going to happen to me. Right at the corner of the front yard though, by the field, there was a big oak tree growing a bit more than like one teenage boy's width away from the fence for the yard, and that was perfect. The bottom plank for the fence was just barely above the ground, maybe a few inches up the post is all, so it was just enough to hide me if I laid down against it. The moment that I saw car headlights start to turn around to drive the other way, my first instinct was to just dive into that spot between the tree and the plank. I fit perfectly too, and managed to get in place before they turned left back onto the road. I put my hood over the back of my head and I just laid there. I heard their brakes though sliding against the wheel as they drove past that yard, and then heard them speed up and drive away a second later. I didn't look. I kept my head down and breathed as heavily as possible while I could, so I didn't have a full-on panic attack until I was sure that they were gone. I got up, looked back, and made sure that I saw no silhouettes of cars and no lights, and I just booked it up the road and to the school. You can bet too that your homie here never went out that late alone again. That was a lesson learned the hard way. All I can say is trust your gut and try to always have a way to protect yourself, if need be. So this story happened back in the 90s to my parents during their senior year of high school. Since their group of friends already had cars, the favorite thing that they loved to do was night hiking around the state's local mental hospital, mainly to its old dairy farm. But this was located on the side of a mountain surrounded by agricultural fields and an open grassland as well. Since the dairy farm was not close to the mental hospital and the nearest city life was located about 5 miles away, at night the area was extremely dark and quiet. Before the dairy farm was closed down, the patients from the mental hospital would go there for work. During this time, some patients lost their lives at this location due to accidents. By the 90s, it was abandoned and left like a ghost town of its own, especially due to its rumors of it being haunted. And it made the perfect place for a fearful experience. So this particular night, around 2 in the morning, my dad, my mum, 4 of their female friends, and 1 male friend planned to go to the dairy farm. They took 2 cars, and when they got to the usual parking spot on the side of the mountain, they saw that there was already a group of like 20 people standing around their cars. When my parents and their friends got out of their cars, they noticed that the group of the men all had shaved heads, were Caucasian, and in their mid-20s. As my parents walked past them, both groups ignored each other and avoided making eye contact. However, my mum turned her head to see one of the men, and as she did this, the man pulled his jacket back and showed a pistol tucked into his pants. Then he pulled his lower lip down, which revealed that he had a triple K tattooed on his bottom lip. When they were out of hearing range, my mum whispered to my dad, "That man has a gun and he has that tattoo." My dad brushed it off, thinking my mum was over-exaggerating things, and said that it was too dark to even notice those 2 things. So with that, my parents and their friends walked through the grassland to get to the dairy farm. The hike to get there is about maybe half a mile from where they parked. However, as soon as they got to the farm, they heard gunshots coming from the direction of the cars. Fearing that something happened to their cars, they booked it back to the parking lot. When they got back, the group of men, they were already gone. But as they inspected their cars, they saw that all of their tires were slashed and their windows were broken and smashed. My dad, who used a particular coloured blanket as a seat cover, and his stereo too, were both stolen. And now they just stood there by their cars wondering what to do next. I mean, it's not like they could just call someone for help. Nobody had a cell phone back then. And since they were deep in this secluded area, they couldn't flag someone down for a pickup. The nearest gas station with a payphone was like 5 miles away as well. Both my dad and his male friend, they didn't want to leave the cars alone since they both drove classic cars and they feared that the men would come back. And eventually it was decided amongst them that sending both males to run to the payphone was the best option, leaving the women by themselves with the cars. This was because they feared that the shaved head men were waiting down the road expecting them to walk to the payphone. My dad and his friend, they ran to the gas station, and as they left, my mum and her friends all gathered heavy rocks to use as some sort of protective weapon and hid away in the bushes behind the trees. 2 hours had passed when my mum noticed headlights coming down the road. 2 tow trucks rolled into the parking spot. At this, too, an immense fear spread throughout the group, until they say that out of the 2 trucks came my dad, his brothers, and the friend. They hooked up the cars to the tow trucks and were out of there in a matter of minutes. My dad told my mum that as they were running down the dark and empty road, they kept their eyes open just in case the men were hiding with their cars, lights off or something, but luckily they got to the gas station without a problem. Now, this next part, it may be hard to believe, but it is 100% the truth. 2 weeks passed and my dad managed to get his car fully repaired and drivable again. My mum and dad were driving to the local store when they parked and got out of the car. As they were walking into the store, a man was walking towards them. As he got closer, my mum realized that this was the same shaved-headed man who flashed the gun at her. My mum immediately told this to my dad, but just like the first time, my dad denied that this was true. Then, 2 weeks later at the same store, my mum and dad were sitting in their car while my mum saw a car pull up next to them. As the man got out and just sort of stood there by his car, she quickly noticed that it was the same man from before. My mum immediately told this to my dad, but again, my dad denied it, but my mum looked into his car and saw the very recognizable colourful blanket that my dad used as a seat cover. This was when my dad finally connected the dots and got out of the car to confront the guy. But the man, realizing what was happening, jumped back into his car and drove away. They didn't have time to get the license plate, unfortunately, and so nothing ever really came of it. The next week, when my dad was filling gas into his car, a car pulled up right behind him, and lo and behold, it was the same man. My dad immediately got into the guy's face, ready to confront him, but the man's friends got out of the car, and one of them pulled out a gun. The man with the gun then told everyone to get inside the car, and the group just drove away. It's been almost 30 years, and they've never seen those men ever since, but to this day, my parents still wonder if all of those encounters were a coincidence or something a lot more sinister. This was one of the first times I ever was truly scared by something paranormal. I was 14 at the time. As of sharing this, I'm 25 years old. My father and I had just started buying guns as I took an interest in shooting. We got an M44, made in 1953 in Poland. For those who don't know much about old guns too, a Mosin Nagant is the battle rifle of Russia from pre-World War I to the end of World War II, and the M44 designation is for a shortened rifle version with a bayonet that can be folded out. So, we had the rifle for a while. I had even shot it and everything before the event occurred. I had researched the marks of the rifle, which is why I knew where it was made and all the little details of the gun. Me being a curious history lover, I love learning anything that I can about items I have. It was months since getting it as well. The initial thrill of getting a gun had long since worn off, and so, really, other than hoping to go shooting sometime soon, it was not on my mind when I went to bed. The reason I mention this too is that it's not assumed that I am just overly imaginative, and after getting an old military gun I just imagined all of this. Anyway, the rifle was at this point the only real gun that we had besides our few .22 caliber rifles for plinking, and they were stored in my closet. So like I said, I went to bed. It was during a break, so no school, which was great because of what unfolded. I didn't sleep much. But I was asleep when I woke up in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. for just no reason. I looked at my closet near my bed, and the door was open, which it was never because it didn't open normally, though I never really shut the door too. But when looking in the closet, it was like I could see something. I got up and I walked literally into the closet that was not my closet. I can only describe it as if I was transported by the closet to a different place, which was also nighttime, and I could sort of see ahead of me what seems to be a watchtower or something. I apparently too was in a watchtower all of a sudden. A fence was near the watchtowers, and then another further one away from it. I then am alerted to a figure moving near the fence, and I raised my gun, fired a round off, which caused a horrible scream, chambered the next round, and fired again, which ceased the memory. I woke up at this point all of a sudden, not knowing where I was or what was going on. I'm standing in my closet now, truly my closet. But nothing really happened in whatever this was. It almost felt like some sort of a hologram disappeared. Maybe it wasn't a dream, and it revealed me sort of just standing there. The feeling, though, was as if I was pulled back through. It's hard to describe, so bear with me. But with this, I left my closet and sat down in my bed wondering what the heck just happened. But I did end up falling back to sleep, and the next morning I woke up early, 8 a.m. or so, which is abnormal for me as I'm more of a 10 a.m. sort of person. Don't judge, I'm just not a morning person unless I must be. But as I woke up, I looked at my closet and I saw a dark figure peeking out of my closet. I didn't scream. I sort of let out a squeak of fear, I guess. To be honest, too, I wasn't even thinking of last night. I just felt like there was someone that broke into my house and was looking at me, even though there really was no reason that he would be a dark shadow instead of a detailed human being, as my room was very well lit by now. But yet, when I got up to look, there was nothing there. The next night, I woke up at 2 a.m. to find a dark shadow once more looking at me from my closet. I will overstate the obvious too. It was pitch black night, and I'm seeing a shadow figure. Yes, this sounds absolutely absurd, I know, because black on black doesn't really show itself, right? I'm a long-time drama club kid, and I know this, which is why this freaks me out still. Yet, I could see it. A dark figure as clear as the one that I saw before. I immediately bolted for my parents' room, screaming my lungs out though as I ran. I explained in a sheer panic how there was a person in my closet and that someone was in the house. But once we were back in my room, there was nothing. This repeated the following night too. The only difference is that the figure was outside of the closet now, and the same effect. I ran screaming. The following night, the same thing too, but now it's looking down at me from next to my bed, and again I'm fleeing. By this point, something connected for me though, and I also demanded the rifle be removed from my closet, and it was placed in my parents' bedroom. And with this, it ceased. All of it. Since then, I refuse to ever have the gun in my bedroom when I sleep, and it remains locked away in a gun safe that we now have. Now, I'm a pretty skeptical person, more so today than I was then. With that said, though, I am very much aware of sleep paralysis and all of those things, but to me, those explanations just make no sense here, as none of the times I was unable to move or anything. I mean, I was able to get up and move to the closet and get up and flee screaming like a madman. An atheist, a non-believing friend, I told, actually referenced some gulag pictures which matched my dream, or whatever that was, extremely close, which freaked me out as I never even really heard of a gulag yet when I had the experience, and I'd never really researched them before. More so too is the fact that gulags shouldn't explain it, as they were not a Polish thing but a Stalinist thing which ended up with his death in 1953. Everything in my mind wants to explain this away, but yet nothing explains why this happened. I don't really disbelieve in the paranormal. Even as a skeptic, I do believe stuff can happen, and I can only sort of reach the conclusion that I saw something that once happened, but to who, why, and where? I guess I may never know. I would actually love for some of you guys to try and debunk this too, simply because, honestly, I would love to believe that it wasn't real and that I could just explain it away, because the thought that someone is attached to this gun truly is pretty tragic. Often, I enjoy walking my dog at night time. This is mainly due to the fact that my dog is harder to walk when people are around with their own dogs. So, we tend to walk around parks in the area when they've become somewhat secluded, I guess. I'm also not a very big guy. I'm about 5'10" and pretty lanky, so I wouldn't call myself an intimidating figure. However, my 120-pound black boxer lab named Loki could be somewhat considered threatening to most from what I hear. I figured that his size would be used as a deterrent for anyone looking to cause nightly troubles. But man, I was dead wrong. You see, on one specific night in the fall of 2016, I can recall an encounter that reminds me of why I'm so reluctant to walk around once daylight falls. This specific park is one that I've been to a couple of times, and from what I remember, this park is usually secluded around 6:30 and later. Aside from a couple of joggers or very few other dog walkers, not many people walk the same path that I take. I also like to put on my headphones and just listen to music while I'm walking. But on this specific night, I chose not to wear them since my phone was on low battery and I wanted to preserve it as long as I could. Anyway, the walk was going pretty much as usual, I would say. Loki did his business and we continued on our usual path. About midway on our walk, I realized that it had started to get really dark. But since he was done with his business too, I decided to cut the walk somewhat short, and we took a shortcut that kind of led us off the path. The path had a bunch of trees surrounding the area, and there were still leaves on the branches. With that being said, I felt a weird feeling as if I was being watched. I have pretty bad anxiety sometimes, but since I knew the town was safe, I knew that nothing was going to really happen. But still, I could not for the life of me shake off the feeling of being watched. I peered back to see if anyone had been following me out of anxiety, and every single time, nobody was there. In fact, nobody was anywhere. This whole shortcut was essentially secluded. But suddenly, Loki stopped walking and also looked back. I told him, "Loki, come on boy, we gotta go, man." One thing I failed to mention was that Loki is a big coward. I noticed his tail was tucked between his legs, which is a telltale sign that a dog is afraid. I'll admit too that I was a little curious and still a bit nervous, but I didn't want to find out what he had heard or noticed, that's for sure. I just wanted to get out ASAP. I pulled a little and he began to walk, but every now and then I would see him peer back. After maybe a minute or so of walking, he stopped again, and this time he began to growl. Now, despite being a coward, Loki is a bark but no bite kind of dog. So I took this chance to see exactly what he was growling at. It was quite dark, so I couldn't really see well, so I used my phone's flashlight to see what was up. Trees. Just trees. which means that what he heard was probably just some kind of an animal, right? Once again, I turned around and I kept walking. He continued to peer back once in a while still, but this time I noticed that it was a lot more frequent. I just said to myself, must just be squirrels or maybe a bird, and I ignored it. Then, I heard what happened to be actual footsteps and branches breaking, and there is absolutely no way a small animal could have produced a sound like that. Loki turned around quick, and still with his tail tucked, he began to growl and bark at a figure that I could only describe as a man in his early 50s, possibly late 40s, appear from out of the woods. He was dressed in dirty clothing, his hair was long and was greying, he had one hand in his pocket, and he said to me, "Nice dog you have here, kid. What breed is he?" He's a boxer lab," I replied. "Oh, I love dogs. Mind if I pet him?" He wandered over. The man got closer and emerged from the trees, and as he got closer, I realized that he was quite tall and pretty burly too. Loki instantly got bad vibes, and he ran behind me and started to bark at him. "Actually, I do kind of mind, man. My dog here doesn't really like strangers. Sorry, but it's probably not the best to pet him," I quickly stated. "Oh, it's okay, man. Really, he seems like a really friendly guy. Just a little pet wouldn't harm him, right?" the man retorted as he got closer. I felt extremely uncomfortable as he appeared to get closer and closer with every step. I don't know why this guy just couldn't take no for an answer. I mean, I usually don't allow people to even pet Loki unless he comes up to them first. If he's scared of you, then I usually do not want him to freak out by letting him be pet by a stranger. This is especially the case when said stranger came from the woods behind trees. "I'm really sorry, man. I'm scared that he bites you or something," I told him as I began to walk away. Like I said before, I wasn't trying to be judgmental or anything, but the dude literally came out from the woods and was possibly the one trailing us from before. "I don't know why you won't just let me introduce myself to him, man," the guy replied, angrily. This time, I began to speedwalk. I was very uncomfortable and my fight or flight instincts began to take over. He followed us too and also kept muttering curses to himself. I don't know if this man was like under the influence or something, but he just did not let up. I won't lie too, I started to get a little bit angry myself. I mean, why can't a guy just take no for an answer? He began to match my speed, almost as if he was trying to catch up to us as well. Loki and I both took this as an answer to start sprinting as fast as we could. To be honest too, I really don't remember much of the running. It was all a bit of a blur to me, but I do remember the spine-tingling feeling of hearing his footsteps rapidly increasing behind me. For a man of his stature, he was quite fast as well. I also realized pretty quickly that his intentions may not have just been to pet my dog. No one reasonable would go that far just to pet a dog that clearly wanted nothing to do with them, right? I looked behind me and he was now in pursuit. Maybe about 10 feet behind me, he was chasing us. I'll never forget the look in his eyes too. I've never had anyone look at me like that. A look of killer intent. And all for what? Just because he couldn't pet my dog? My instincts told me that he definitely had sinister intent behind that. But finally, the path led back to the park exit and into the busier streets. I lived about 10 minutes away from the park. I made sure nobody was following me, and I even made sure to walk on the populated streets this night. After what seemed like an eternity, we finally got home, but I knew for a fact that I was not going to get a minute of sleep that night. From my window in the porch, I watched pretty much all night with Loki, just to see if anyone had followed us home. I also made a police report with my parents. After all, this guy seemed to have been quite suspicious, and who knows what his true intentions were. Had his target been someone who couldn't protect themselves or run away like I did, what would he have done? I also often ask myself, what if I had worn my headphones that night and the sound of music drowned the footsteps behind me. Ever since, I haven't walked low-key in that park, and I've also made it a habit of mine to walk on livelier streets at night. If I could give anyone one piece of advice, even if you live in a relatively safe town, never, ever let your guard down. You just never know what kind of person might be lurking in the shadows, or, as in my case, within the trees. When I was in my early 20s, I went through a really dark time. All of my friends had moved away, and I'd gone through a traumatic breakup. I was also stuck in a town that I didn't like. I was in school and couldn't leave, and I was living with my sister in an old shanty house. I was super depressed, and I think the energy that I was putting out alienated me from my peers. I've always been sensitive and interested in the occult. I started reading books on chaos magic and Grant Morrison's pop magic. I began making up rituals and got really into spiritualism, and I used candle magic, would write messages on the candles, and would use my blood sometimes. I always protected myself and had rosemary and different crystals on hand. But I started having really vivid dreams of, and I know this sounds weird, but bear with me, a wolf spirit named Jenny. We would sit atop mountains in my dreams and drink tea and talk, and I asked her what she was, but she would never answer my questions. I dreamt about her almost every night, in fact, and it got to the point where I even saw her shadow once or twice in my waking state, I think. Anyway, one night I did a pretty powerful ritual, I guess you could say. While I thought that I was coming from a good and positive place, I had a lot of sadness in my heart. That night, when I was trying to sleep, I just had the worst feeling too. I felt like a million eyes were watching me and my stomach was in knots. I was so scared that I turned the light on and tried to go back to bed. But 5 minutes later, the light bulb in my room literally burst. I was in the dark again, and I saw something. It was white and translucent, and sort of looked like it was made of fine lace. Whatever it was, it flew from one side of my room to the other, and I was so scared at this point that I decided to crawl into my sister's bed. She was sound asleep, and I slept at the foot of her bed. 5 a.m. comes along, and my sister wakes me up. She's really startled for some reason, and she tells me that she dreamt of a wolf that was telling her to get up and walk outside. This wolf kept insisting that she get out of her bed and leave the house. And she ended up waking up standing at her car, keys in hand. She had apparently sleepwalked, something she had never done before, and she had no idea that I'd been sleeping at the foot of her bed, and was startled when she walked back into her room and saw me. Mind you, I had never told her about Jenny, so it's crazy that she dreamt of a creature that looked so similar and was trying to coax her away from me. After that happened, I stopped playing with magic, and after a while the dreams of Jenny stopped too. But I still wonder about all of this. I still wonder about what she was. If any of you have had any similar things happen or could give me some insight, I would really appreciate it. I've read a lot about all of this stuff, but who knows? Maybe I'm missing something. So I, a 22-year-old female, live in a brand new apartment complex on a nice side of town. My city is pretty safe in general. This is the first time that I've lived alone. So, even though it is a safe area, I took some precautions, which included installing a Ring video doorbell. I have honestly never needed it in the 6 months that I've lived here, so no unexpected visitor has ever come by. That is, until last night. I was sitting at home alone with my dog, working on some homework. It was nearly 8 p.m. and starting to get dark. At night, I have my Ring set up to alert me when any person is detected outside of my door. And I received a notification of motion at my door, but I didn't think much of it. At 8 p.m, people are still walking down the hall, up the stairs, etc. About 30 seconds later, though, I received several loud knocks on my door, and my ring is pushed rapidly 3 times. At this point, I was a little bit spooked, and my dog is going nuts as well. I open up the app to see 2 men standing outside of my door. I sort of debated internally on if I should open it or not, but then decided since it wasn't quite dark yet, and my neighbors were home, that it would be safe to do so. I sort of slowly open the door, just enough to put my head out. The man nearest to me says that they are with the Wealth Committee and complimented my wreath. He then went on to say that he was with an internet company and he and his partner were here to offer me a deal. Now, my apartment has a very strict no-tolerance policy for solicitation of any kind. We are told to immediately report that kind of activity, and there are signs posted all around stating that solicitation is prohibited by law here. I told the men that I'm happy with my current service and was not interested in switching. The man who spoke first continued to speak about the great deal that they were offering. I continued to decline, and he kept saying that he lived really close to here and he'd be happy to personally set up the service. He even offered to come inside and help me get started immediately. Obviously, I declined his offer once more, and he reiterated that if I changed my mind to give him a call, because he could be here in 5 minutes to help me out. He handed me a business card, and I tried to end the conversation again, but he then tells me that he just can't walk away knowing that I could get such a good deal, and I'm saying no to it. At that point, my instincts were telling me something was off. I decided to take a more aggressive approach, I guess you could say, and I asked him if he was aware that my apartment has a strict no solicitation policy. He said that he was aware, but that he cleared it with management. My apartment actually has a very small management team, and I know every single one of them. So I asked who he had cleared it with, and he said that he cleared it with the guys on the golf cart, Mike and Will, and that Mike was a great guy. And now I knew that it was all a lie. Our management team is only women here. There is nobody by the name of Mike or Will. In fact, only one man works here, and his name is Joe. I say, "Thanks, but I'm not interested." The man closed the door and locked it loudly. I took a closer look at the business card that he handed me, and it had a logo and the name that he gave me, but the email was not a company email. It was a Yahoo account. The phone number also did not appear when I searched it up for the company. I decided to post about my encounter in the residents-only Facebook page, and a few other women commented that they had similar interactions tonight, but that they were given different names, and the strange thing was, none of the men of the couples were approached. It was only women that they spoke with. They talked to my upstairs neighbor, I think, and my neighbors across the hall, both girls, and didn't speak to either of the men that live on the same floor as me. Everyone was also given different names, and everyone was offered vastly different deals. 2 women were told that they didn't have business cards to hand out. I thought that it might be worth Googling this guy's name to see if anything popped up as well. And sure enough, the second result was a report on an offender registry. Turns out, the man who spoke at my door has 5 felonies and has served several years in jail for various charges, including trafficking a controlled substance, theft by deception, and possession of stolen property. I knew that it was him too because there was a photo attached to the report. He's currently on parole until November apparently, but I'm not sure if I'm overthinking this situation because this is my first time experiencing something like this, but I know it didn't feel right, that's for sure. Maybe I'm just being dramatic or paranoid, but the entire thing feels more than a little bit off. I'm not sure if they were just scammers or if they were staking out places to rob, or maybe worse, who knows, but I reported it to my property manager who was investigating it today. I'm just a bit uneasy about the whole thing, I guess. If they return, I'll be calling the police for sure. As of the time of sharing this, nothing else suspicious has happened, thankfully, and I'm safe at the moment, but I'll continue to stay vigilant. Be safe out there, guys. So I'm a bit of a skeptic of the supernatural, and I've never put much stock into ghosts or spirits. I do think aliens are real and rationally could exist through biological processes. My kids have had, well, experiences in each house that we've lived in, though. I always wrote it off as overactive imagination, but for a little over a year now, my youngest son has been talking to us about the baby in his room. He's only 2 and will be 3 soon. So, it started when he first started talking. He would wake up screaming for us, saying that the baby in his room was trying to get him. He would be terrified, and it would take a long time to get him calmed and back to sleep. My wife and I, we just sort of wrote this off as being overstimulated by something that he saw on TV. He seemed to calm down, only mentioning his friend every so often, but he stopped waking up terrified, so we thought that we were past it. Here lately, though, as he's gotten more articulate, he's bringing up details out of nowhere that we're having a hard time explaining. Things like the description of this thing, its favorite things, and where it comes from and how it comes in the room. Some of these details, we cannot figure out how he would get this info. Like, the baby is naked, smaller than him, and it can fly with wings. Its favorite food is dates and likes to drink milk. We're a middle-class white family, and the only time that I've ever heard of dates was in Indiana Jones, which he's never seen. He says it flies into his room from the windows and talks to him. He refuses to elaborate on what it wants and what they talk about. He says that it lives in the woods and it is never present during the day, like when he's playing with his toys. Which, if it was an imaginary friend, I would have thought that he'd be playing with it when he was playing. I'm coming here because I'm starting to see things that I can't explain and hear things that just do not make sense as well. Like, last week, I was out doing yard work and had been playing with a clothes hanger, like a grappling hook sort of thing. When I came back inside through the front door, I found the hanger standing up by itself about 2 feet away from the door. He was upstairs playing and nobody was around it, and I thought that it was strange and asked my wife how the heck he did that, picked it up and put it away. The next day, as I was walking from my kitchen to the bedroom, I saw motion out of my peripheral. It was moving fast, and when I turned my head, I saw a shadow figure flying near the ceiling, going from the bar into the kitchen, past a hanging light fixture, and through the wall just above the glass door leading to the deck. And the best way that I can describe it is, it was a lot like a fairy. It was about 8 inches tall with butterfly-like wings. The top wings were sort of lobed, but the bottom wings were kind of pointed. At this point, I turned around to my wife to ask if she just saw that. She had her back to it though, so unfortunately she didn't see anything. After this incident, I reconsidered the clothes hanger. I tried for nearly an hour to make this thing stand up. I was hoping that it was curved or bent in a way to make it stand up, or there was a spot in the hardwood floor that was perfect for it to nestle in or something, but I just could not replicate it no matter how hard I tried. I asked my son what he did, or if he even did it, and he said that he sang to it, and his friend made it stand up. The only thing that I know about fairies is from movies, and I believe in things that could possibly exist, like aliens or Bigfoot, I suppose. I don't think spirits are real, but all of this is definitely making me reevaluate things a bit, and everything that I've researched about these things from folklore is definitely not pleasant. Anyway, I guess I'm here to try and get some answers, and I'm wondering if any of you guys have seen anything similar or have had any experience with this type of thing. If you have or do know anything, then please do drop a message below, because I'm a bit freaked out. So, I'm a server at a local restaurant in Texas, and today I had a table that struck me as just really odd. It was a man who appeared to be in his early 30s and a girl who looked maybe around 8 or 9. I understand that different families have different dynamics, but almost everyone, including married couples, wants separate dishes when sharing a salad. However, this grown man and child ate out of the same really small bowl, huddled close together, which I found strange. The girl wouldn't really look at me, and the man did all the talking, which is not particularly out of the ordinary, but she was huddled down and hiding her face. Kids can be shy though, but most of them at least sit up straight. I sort of mentioned it to the bartender that I found the man creepy, and he basically told me to write it off or ignore it. So I did. I pretty much ignored the bad feeling in my gut, the feeling that everyone says to listen to, right? After the two of them left, I walked over to their table to look at the receipt and see how much they tipped me. However, my attention was immediately caught by writing at the bottom. Along the bottom left portion of the receipt was written, "I think you're very pretty, miss," with a smiley face next to it. Then along the bottom it said, "Not my dad." All of the writing appeared to be in a different sort of handwriting than whoever wrote the tip. I found this really weird, and I showed it to the management, and they said to ignore it. My boss said that the girl may have written the note to say that I was pretty, and then added on the last part to specify her dad, the man that I assumed was her dad, didn't think that. But I don't know. I have no idea, and it's not really my business, I suppose, but this entire interaction and the receipt gave me such a bad feeling, and I'm still kind of creeped out by it. I mean, it's entirely possible that the letter is just harmless. But then again, the "not my dad" part may be specifying that this little girl is in trouble. I'm not sure if I should report it or not, or even be concerned, but I figured that I would share it here and see what you guys think. A few nights ago, I had a wedding to attend, and whenever I have to dress fancy, I put on this sparkly necklace that my grandma left to me when she passed away. The chain is very thin gold, and the pendant is a thick solid gold R, which is my grandma's and my first initial. The front of the R is covered in diamonds, and it's the kind of necklace pendant that doesn't twist or rotate. It stays facing whichever way you put it, so naturally, every time that I put this necklace on, I always check to make sure that I put it on the right way, the shiny side facing out. So, before the wedding, I put on the necklace as per usual, looked in the mirror to make sure that it was on the right way, which it was, and then I go to the wedding and take a bunch of pictures with friends. All the while, in every single picture, my necklace is faced the right way. Then, I get home and I'm exhausted and I go lay in bed. I'm too tired to take off my jewelry and makeup, so I just leave the necklace on, which I never do because the chain is fragile. Right before I went to sleep, though, my cat jumped onto the bed with me and was laying across my chest, being adorable, so I took a picture of her laying on my chest. In that picture, with my cat, taken moments before I went to sleep, the necklace was on the right way, sparkly diamond side facing out. Anyway, I had a horrible dream that night where someone was pulling on my necklace and I was yelling at them to stop, but it was too late and the necklace broke off my neck. Instead of the person taking it and stealing it, the moment that it broke off and fell to the floor, the person who broke it just disappeared or evaporated. I then picked it off the ground and was examining it close to my face and realized that the clasp was broken, and I was all upset about it. The next morning, I jolted awake from the dream and went to take a shower. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw something that made my stomach drop to the floor. My necklace? It was now on backwards. The diamond side was facing inwards, which, let me just say, is impossible unless it was taken off me and turned completely around and put back on. I definitely did not take it off myself in my sleep too, because I actually have arthritis in my hand, so it's really hard for me to unclasp it, even while I'm awake, because it's so small. I asked my husband if he had taken it off me in my sleep, and he said no, and that he was working on his computer the entire time that I was asleep and didn't even come into the room once. I have just zero explanation for how this could have possibly happened. I've racked my brain for literally any reasonable answer, and I can't think of even one. Whatever happened, it gives me shivers to even think about it. To better paint the picture, here's a description of myself at the time of this incident 3 years ago. I'm 5'5", 26-year-old woman, medium-length bleach blonde hair, curvy, 175 pounds, wearing black high-waisted tights and a pink crop top. 3 years ago, I was walking home late at night from my friend's house. It was dark, and at the time I lived in a rough part of a large city. I've had many sketchy situations that have gotten myself out of, so I guess I felt sort of invincible, like nothing truly scary could happen to me. When I walk alone, I always stay very alert and aware of my surroundings for my own safety just in case. Anyway, about halfway home and roughly 10 minutes to my apartment, I noticed a van starting to tail me. I was used to this since in my city it's very common for a young woman in a rough area to get propositioned for a fun time. It's embarrassing just how desensitized to this I was. But I did my usual and crossed the road so that I'd be walking beside the traffic heading in the other direction. I wasn't scared, just annoyed, I guess. The van then turned down a side street, then back onto the road that I was on and pulled up to me. At this point, I still wasn't really scared. Again, this has happened so many times, and it never mattered if I was wearing something that showed more skin or if I was wearing a winter coat zipped from just below my chin all the way down to my ankles. That area is notorious for that type of activity. I decided to be firm this time and told the person sternly, I'm not interested. I noticed, though, that there were 2 men in the van. They looked almost identical and may have been twins or brothers, I think. In any case, both men had a very dark complexion, dark eyes, short dark hair. The van didn't move, and I was super annoyed, sort of crossed the road again to get away. At this point, I figured that this would be enough for them to just stop following me. But they didn't. Instead, they kept circling back every time that I crossed the road. I've never had to put that much effort into getting a pervert to leave me alone, so this is when I started feeling unsafe. They zipped by me at the speed of the traffic that was flowing in, and I yelled for them to get lost. I honestly thought that it finally worked too. It had been 3 minutes, and I hadn't seen the van, so I thought that I was in the clear. Just in case, though, I pulled my phone out and was getting ready to call my sister that I lived with, when just then, the van pulled up to me very quickly, and before I could even blink, one of the men jumped out of the van, opened the back door and approached me quickly in an aggressive manner, as if he was about to scoop me up and throw me into the vehicle. The traffic in that area is very inconsistent. It was dead, and I imagined that this is what they were waiting for. But just as the man was about to place his hands on me, I tilted my phone and said, "You're being filmed in my live video chat. I gave my friend your license plate number and the police have been notified." I was so scared, but I didn't let that show. I stayed as calm as I could. The man paused like he was considering if I was bluffing or telling the truth, so I tilted the phone more as if to give the fake audience a better look at him. This seemed to have worked, and he jumped into the van and they sped off. I've never been the same since that night. I'm afraid of walking alone now, even in the daytime. Stay safe out there, guys, and be careful. You never know what could happen to you. So, I'm a hunter, and I like to hunt wild boar specifically. Though I have been deer hunting and have been known to get a turkey for Thanksgiving, I do mostly hunt boar. For those of you that don't know, boar are a pretty big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. And given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife makes it illegal to hunt them, with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boar and coyote. I'd been saving for a year, mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife that a scope that cost literally twice as much as the rifle that I was mounting it on was worth it. But in the end, I did it. I took it to a range and sighted it in. There was also an area that was prepared with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy-to-find spots that I could set up in that overlooked a large, easy-to-navigate clearing. The night started uneventful, mostly me just tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings and whatnot. I was a little bit impatient. I spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season, and like I mentioned earlier, my current setup wasn't legal for deer. So I moved to another spot that I'd seen days earlier. That probably wasn't much better than my first, but it gave me something to do and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After about maybe an hour or so of just glassing the area, it dawned on me. This spot doesn't have much animal activity at all. No rabbits or owls. The deer that I'd seen were hundreds of yards from where I was. Why was this pocket of land so dead at night, but lively during the day? I'd set up at around 10 p.m, and it was about 2 a.m. when I started to think about packing up, and maybe setting up a target before I left, but I then heard a crunch come from the direction that I came from before. I panned my scope over and saw the silhouette of a small bear. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's just a thermal scope, kind of like a black and white version of what you see in the Predator movies, I guess. But in any case, I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little bit. I remember jolting a bit too when I saw that it wasn't really a bear. It was actually a man. But because he was so low and hunched over, I thought that I was looking at a young bear at first. Is that a game warden? It couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming up the road from where I was perched. And where could he have walked from anyway? I was like 30 miles away from anything and on public lands. I was about to call out when I then noticed that he was completely naked. No shoes, no pants, nothing. I remember being disturbed by his movements, sort of like a squirrel or something, twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the trees. Was that my tree? The one that I'd been leaning against earlier? The thought terrified me. Could he smell me? But then he did something that I still have nightmares about today. He squatted, placed his hands in the dirt between his feet, and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. And I heard it. A voice coming from that direction. But it was a female voice. She said, "Help, I'm lost." There was a long pause, but neither of us moved a muscle. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in front of his feet, but I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. Were they lost? Was this some guy that had gone crazy out here? Why was his voice so feminine? Then again, "Help, please, I can't walk," the voice called out. That's when I called it. Not only could he walk, but when I first saw him, he was traversing the land with ease for a naked person. So good, in fact, that I mistook him for a bear. This was a trap for sure. This guy was trying to lure me into him with a damsel in distress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear, and I think I may have left behind a hat, maybe, and a sitting pad, but I didn't care at this point. I took my eyes off him for a moment to get my pack on, and I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. And to my horror, he was in the same position, but his face was now staring in my direction, and I could have sworn that I saw him smile. But how the heck he heard me get up and put my gear on, I have no idea. He must have easily been 150 yards away at least. I screamed at him to leave me alone in that direction, and he stood straight up, and it hit me all of a sudden just how tall and skinny this guy was. Easily 6 feet and very lean. He took a couple of long strides in my direction, and I instinctively sent a round sailing above his head into the tree line. He was freaky, man, but he didn't really threaten me at this point, so what would I do? Call the cops? He stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. I yelled at him, "The next one will be in your head. Get lost." He strayed on all fours, and this time I had my sights on the center of him. His eyes, though, were just above the grass like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling and knew that my voice had cracked a little on that last warning. I was terrified. That standoff probably only lasted maybe a minute or two, maybe less, but man, it felt like a long time, let me tell you. In an instant, though, he bolted left towards the tree line opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk, eh? I couldn't keep him on my scope, and he was moving so quickly. He disappeared into the brush, and I sent another round sailing high in his direction. I racked another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap for a fresh one, but I dropped it, and I didn't bother looking for it. I wasn't far from my truck, and at this point, I just wanted to get out of there. I could still hear him in the distance, though, yelling in his weird sound that could have been a laugh or a cry. I don't know, but I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab, but kept the rifle in the passenger seat, and I sped off. For the longest time, I told that story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead living off the land like some kind of caveman or something. I reported it to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting at night alone. Never received an update either. And it wasn't until I told this story at a camping trip that my nephew told me about wendigos, rakes, and skinwalkers. And my story scared this kid half to death because the spot that we were camping was technically the same forest that I'd seen this guy, just 50 miles east of it. He was so spooked that his mum, my cousin, had to take him home, and she was really angry, unfortunately. But anyway, I've gone down the rabbit hole, so to speak, with these stories, and I'm not saying that what I saw definitely was a wendigo or a skinwalker. Heck, it probably was just some crazy dude. What I am saying, though, is that if such a thing exists, I may have dodged quite the bullet that night. Or, again, maybe it was just a tweaker being Donnie Thornberry in the middle of the night. Either way, I just thought that I would share this, and I hope you enjoyed. I was hiking in the Olympic National Forest a few years ago by myself and my 2 dogs. We were 4 days in, around 20 miles at least as a crow flies from even a known mountain road. I was camping at around 7k feet that night, or right where the tree line started thinning out. So, when you go to the campsite, there's a big open meadow on the top of a secondary mountain. It was about an hour from sunset. My big dog usually runs around within proximity of the camp as I put the tent up or make dinner and stuff. But I noticed this time was a little different. He kept staring up at this steep tree-filled mountainside, tail straight up, and barking. Not the bark when you see small animals too. Not the excited, "oh, you guys are lucky because I'd rip you all apart if my master wasn't here," high-pitched barks, but sort of unsure or concerned barks. Now, the day before, I'd found a note left under a rock at the last landmark, saying that there was apparently a problem bear in the area that was harassing a party of campers a few days ago. And I myself had seen big cat tracks the day before, so I was rightfully concerned that this may be more than just ground squirrels. I decided to go climb up some of the boulders at the foot of the hill while I took my time looking up the hillside for a moment, before I went to go hang up my bear bag up there. They were the only trees around to hang the bag. I didn't see or hear anything, but my dog kept quietly whining like there was something up there. So, while still concerned, I started hiking up this steep hill to hang the bag. It was so steep that I had to use the trees to balance and lean against, so I didn't go tumbling down, before making another 5 or 6 step push to the next tree that I could lean against. Anyway, I'm slowly making my way up this hill or ridge, hopping from tree to tree to keep my balance. Then I get about maybe 100 feet up the hill and I hear a whole lot of big movement about 50 feet in front of me. My dog immediately goes from a deep low growl to a savage slobber flying everywhere type barking now. My heart starts pounding out of my chest and I immediately start to panic. A million thoughts go racing through my head in the matter of seconds. Because if this is a bear, my dog is going to try and save me. In which case, he's most likely about to die. And I'm just sort of stuck here. If I have to get off this hillside fast, I almost 100% am going to trip and fall off the 12 to 15 foot cliff onto the boulders below. Like hundreds of 5 to 20 foot boulders as well. So I'm feeling pretty screwed about now. But then I hear my other little dog start barking and freaking out down at the campsite, which was just out of sight. I had zipped her in my tent so she didn't wander off while I was away, so yeah, I'm absolutely panicking at this point. A few seconds after, I kind of snap back to it, and I take another few seconds to start to put my survival priorities in order and call my dog back to me, Loki by the way. He comes and sits against my feet, as my back is against a tree, so I'm kind of pinned or stuck there for the moment. But my dog was seemingly trying to separate me from something up there, so I let him lean against me while I try to collect myself. This is when I realized too that I had completely forgot that I had my headlamp on. I reach up so fast up to turn my lamp on and I basically punch myself in the face. I'm having some serious adrenaline pumps going right now, so much so that my knees are starting to shake. I get my lamp on and peer up the hillside. I figure I'll at least get a reflection of the eyes or whatever's up there. I peer up there, look around, but nothing. But I just heard something. We both did. And whatever it was, it didn't get away or sound like it had made it too far, I guess. I knew something was there, so I'm just kind of steadfast at this point. I need to know what's up here because I have to sleep here tonight. And you know, I'm out in the middle of nowhere alone, right? Better to face it now than wait like a sitting duck all night is my thought process. So yeah, as I'm looking up this hill and at one point my dog lunges forward, unpinning me, he does like a fake bluff charge up the hill about 15 feet and I mean, he's snarling and foaming at the mouth at this point. As he does this, I finally see movement. Something moving up and breaking the line of the horizon or sunset. My dog's bluff made whatever it was blow its cover, so I'm zeroed in now. I call my dog back and silently watch, and what I make out made my heart completely drop. There was a man crouched about maybe 75 feet directly in front of me, wearing not camo clothes, but some raggedy sort of hood. It blended into the environment perfectly. Actually, almost like a makeshift ghillie suit, but with his face exposed. I couldn't see his eyes, and his face was covered in dirt or something, but I knew that we were staring right at each other at that moment. So, I stare, for what seems like minutes. No words. I felt like I was trying to subconsciously convey that I was going to stand my ground. I wanted him to know that I saw him, but I guess I was just too shaken to speak. As I'm staring, my little dog back at the campsite started to bark her head off again, like she was scared. And I also had to get off that hill before total darkness, or I could be seriously hurt or risk dying trying to get back down. So, carefully, I start heading down the hill with my dog, who doesn't want to leave but listens. Periodically, I would stop with my back against a tree holding me up and look in that direction again just to make it even more clear that I saw him. And eventually, I make it down to the boulders at the bottom. By the time that I finally jumped down and hit the boulders, my little dog had stopped barking and I could only see the top of my tent from the bottom of the boulders. I thought that she was barking just to sort of bark. Dachshunds do that. Or just barking back at my dog maybe. But when I get there, my little dog had somehow got out of the tent and was walking around the camp growling with her tail sticking straight up. Still trying to hold it together, I thought, okay, maybe she just got her nose between the zippers and worked her way out. But I was positive that I had zipped it, so the zipper tap or openings was at the very top of the tent door, way out of reach of her. There was no way that she could have done that. In a mixture of being terrified, annoyed, and the feeling of needing to do something, I reached into my day bag and pulled out my .40, and I fire a single shot into the air as the sun was setting. I climb into my tent without eating, and lay with my gun next to me until first light. And as soon as the sun came up, I was packing up my stuff and leaving, heading back down the mountain. It sucked too that it was all downhill back there, but I still couldn't cover the ground to get back to my car in one day. It was dark by the time that I made it to the last camp, maybe about 4 miles from my vehicle, but thankfully there were other people there. We sat around a fire that they'd made, and I felt pretty relieved and safe at this point. And they start to tell me that they're planning to head that way where I was the night before in the morning. So I tell them my story in detail, and needless to say, we were both walking back to our cars in the morning, because, well, to heck with that, right? The thing that still creeps me out about this whole day, though, is that when I got home and started reading reviews of the same hike that I was on, other people had had similar experiences like mine as well. Even a man found dead from a fall around the same boulder range 2 years ago, and even a woman who was found murdered last year. I don't know for sure if these stories are related to my experience, but I just can't help but think that they just might be.